the last thing my father ever said to me," he said, without looking up from his papers. I was standing in the middle of a great hall built to make a person feel small. Marble floor polish so bright it threw the windows back at the ceiling. Banners with our crest hanging from beams I could not have reached with 3 of me stacked up. My 3 older brothers stood off to the side with their arms folded, the way men stand when they have already decided how a thing is going to end and are only waiting to watch it happen. My father told me, in that flat voice that had never once warmed for me, that he could not keep me in the house any longer. He said it the way another man might mention the weather. The family had an image to protect, and I was a stain on it. A 4th son with the worst magic aptitude a noble could be cursed with, plant magic. Useless in war, useless in standing, useless for everything a great house was supposed to be. None of it was new. I had been the disappointment since the day they first tested my aptitude, and the examiner's face fell. Years of being looked through at my own family's table, of brothers who spoke past me, of a father whose eyes slid off me like I was a draft in the room. The Exile was only the last page of a book they had been writing my whole life. What stung was not the wasteland waiting for me. It was how little it cost him to send me to it. So he was giving me a territory, a reward, the way he framed it. I knew better. It was a wasteland on the far edge of the map, abandoned for centuries, with not one living soul left in it. "Get out," he told me, "and do not come back until that dead land is worth something." Nobody argued. Nobody even looked surprised. My brothers watched me cross that endless floor toward the doors. And the thing I remember most is not the anger. It is that not one face in that hall thought I was worth a goodbye. I was barely 19. And as far as the House of Ashford was concerned, I had already stopped existing. That was a month ago. The territory had a population of 1 when I arrived, and that one was me. My father had called it Deadland, and for once, he was not wrong. The grass had given up. The well was dry, and the house they had granted me leaned to one side, like it was tired of standing, with a roof that let the rain in, and a floor that gave a little every time I crossed it. I should have been broken. A lesser version of me probably was, that first night, sitting alone in the cold with nothing. But something had come back to me out there in the quiet. Memories that were not from this life at all. A whole other lifetime, lived inside a vast game world I had poured years into, where I had not been a failure of a 4th son. I had been a master, a sage who had walked every depth of one art the rest of the players threw away as a joke. Plant magic. The same magic my father had just exiled me for. I knelt down on the rotted floorboards and pressed my hand flat against the wood. The old knowledge moved through me like it had only been waiting for me to remember it was there. I reached for the spell, the one that raises a living tree from almost nothing, and I let it go. The floor split, not with a crack of ruin, but with green. A trunk pushed up through the boards, thick and pale and impossibly fast, and where it rose, the rot peeled away. Branches ran out along the broken beams and thickened into walls. Roots laced under my feet and pulled the sagging frame straight. Wood that had been dying for 100 years grew young again around me, knitting itself into a home. Solid walls, a sound roof, a floor that did not flinch when I stood. I turned in a slow circle in the middle of it, breathing hard, the magic having taken nearly everything I had. Useless, they had called it. I almost wished one of them had been standing there to watch. The trouble was that one spell had nearly emptied me. My body in this life was weak, low mana, no training. None of the deep reserves the sage I used to be had taken for granted. I could feel it. A candle burned almost to the wick. In my old life, this would have been the wall every plant mage hit, and most never got past. No teacher out here, no resources, no allies, just a tired young man in a tree. Except I knew something the rest of this world did not. I held out my hand again and called a different spell, a small one, the kind a beginner could manage. A single red berry grew in my palm, round and bright as a cherry, heavy with something I could feel before I even tasted it, a magic fruit. I put it in my mouth and bit down. The fatigue eased, not all at once, but real. The candle climbing back up, a little of my mana flooding back warm into my chest. And the moment it did, I understood exactly what I was holding. Casting drained me, but this fruit gave back more than the casting cost, which meant the wall was not a wall at all. I could cast until I was empty, eat, recover, and cast again, over and over, with no master, no academy, no money, nothing but my own 2 hands and a dead land no one wanted. A loop with no ceiling on it. free practice forever. I sat there in the dark with the taste of it still on my tongue, and for the first time since that great haul, I let myself feel the size of what was coming. They threw me away because they could not see what I was. Fine, I would build it here, where they could not stop me, until it was too big to ignore. I would not crawl back to that house. I would not beg for a place at their table. I would make them come to me. I would make the men who looked through me stand in front of witnesses and admit out loud that they had been wrong about everything. Not in private, not a quiet letter slipped under a door where they could pretend it never happened. I wanted it witnessed, the whole proud house of them forced to say it where it counted, and I wanted it to come to me. That was the part I held on to hardest, sitting alone in that grown dark. I would not be the one knocking. They would be the ones who crossed the floor this time, every cold one of them, and I would watch their faces do what mine had done in that great hall. That was the night the work started, and it did not stop. 2 weeks went by like that. Cast, eat, recover, cast again. My mana that first night had been a guttering wick. By the end of those 2 weeks, it had more than doubled, and it was still climbing. I grew the red fruit by the basketful just to eat, and I lived better on that dead land than I had ever lived under my father's roof, which was its own kind of joke. I was careful, even then, with no one for 100 miles to be careful in front of. The old part of me knew exactly what a man becomes the moment the world learns he can grow what everyone else has to bleed and barter for. Power like that draws eyes, and eyes draw hands. So I kept the true scale of it to myself, and I let the world go on believing plant magic was a punchline for exactly as long as that lie stayed useful to me. Then one morning, the loop handed me something new, a spell I had not been strong enough to reach before unlocked the moment I crossed some quiet threshold. And when I cast it, what grew in my hand was not red, it was blue. A small berry that glowed faintly, the light moving inside it like deep water. A heal berry, the raw material every healing potion in the world is made from. I turned it over in the light, and even with my hazy half memories, I knew the color was good. Better than good. The richer the blue, the higher the grade, and this one burned like the bottom of the sea. So I grew more. I grew a whole box of them, packed them careful and tight, and set them by the door. I had no idea yet what they were truly worth out in the world. I only knew a noble with an empty territory needs money before he needs almost anything else, and a man who can grow treasure out of dirt should probably find someone to sell it to. I did not have to wait long for someone to find me first. The carriages came up the old road just after midday, fine ones, lacquered and well kept, the kind that did not belong anywhere near a wasteland like mine. I watched them from the window first. Old habit. A man alone learns to look before he opens a door. They were merchants, and not human ones. They were catkin, small catfolk, none of them taller than my waist, with twitching ears and quick, clever hands, moving in a tidy column around the lead carriage. There must have been 20 of them. The one who came forward to greet me wore the cleanest coat of the lot, and carried himself like a man who had bowed to nobles before and knew exactly how it was done. He introduced himself as Nathan, head of the Black Moon Trading Company, and he presented the customary fee for passing through my land with both hands and a careful little bow. Polite, honest eyes. The sort of person you trust faster than you mean to. I told him to keep the formalities light. I am not much good at stiff manners either, I said. Don't worry about it. That seemed to put him at ease, and it gave me my opening. There is something I would like you to look at, I said, and I held out one of the blueberries. If it suits you, I would like to sell it. The change in his face was instant. His ears shot straight up. He took the berry like I had handed him something holy, turned it to the light, and went very still. This is a heal berry, he breathed. He looked up at me, then back down, then up again. Forgive me, but where did you get this? I only smiled. He went on without waiting, the words tumbling out of him. There was a shortage, he said. A bad one, the worst in 100 years. Heal berries had all but vanished from every market in the kingdom. His company ran on potions, and without the berries to make them, his whole trade had ground to a halt. They had been on the long road to the dungeon city, scraping for any source they could find, and here was one, glowing in his palm, in the middle of the deadest land on the map. This quality, he said, half to himself. I have never seen a blue like this in my life. He asked very carefully, like he was afraid of the answer, whether I might have any more. That was the part I had been waiting for. I stepped back inside, brought out the box, and set it down in front of him. Not a handful, not a dozen. A full case of them, packed shoulder to shoulder, every one of them lit with that same deep blue, more heal berries than his crippled trade had probably seen in a year. For a moment, nobody said anything at all. Then the whole column of catkin made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a cry, ears flat, paws over their mouths. Two of them sat straight down in the dirt. Nathan just stared at the box, then at me, and the look on his face had changed into something I had not been shown in a very long time: respect. He asked if he could buy all of them. He asked if I might be willing to sell to him regularly, going forward. I don't mind, I told him. That works better for me too. So he weighed them, every single berry one at a time, with a little merchant's scale and a focus that bordered on prayer. When he was done, he named his price, and he named it like a man worried it might still be too low. 20 gold coins. I kept my face still, but inside something turned over. I had not known the number, that was the truth of it, but I knew enough of this world to know what one gold coin meant. A commoner family could live a whole month on a single one. He was offering 20 for a box of fruit I could regrow in an afternoon. Is that really such a large sum? I asked, before I could stop myself. He took it for noble modesty and pressed the coins on me anyway. Then he went back to his people, and they put their heads together, and I watched them decide my future without quite meaning to. They did not even bother to question where the berries came from. The name Ashford was one of the 5 great houses of the kingdom, and a young lord of that blood, growing miracles on his own land, was, to them, exactly the sort of rising star a smart merchant attaches himself to early. They had no idea the land was a punishment. They thought they had found a hidden heir. Nathan came back with his hat in his hands and an offer of his own. He wanted to move his whole company here, build a base on my territory, set up a guild, throw in with me from the ground up. I thought about the Great Hall, about crossing that endless marble floor, while not one person thought me worth a goodbye. All right, I said. Then I accept your stay. And just like that, the population of my dead territory went from 1 to 21. A month after my own family decided I did not exist, 20 people who owed me nothing chose to follow me on the strength of a single afternoon. It was a small thing, in the scale of what I meant to build. But standing on that barren road with the coins warm in my hand, and my first followers settling in behind me, I let myself believe it for the first time. They had thrown away something that was going to come back as a power they could not pretend not to see. And when it did, when my name reached that cold hall again, they were going to be the ones standing on the wrong side of the door. I could wait. I had nothing but time, and a magic the whole world was wrong about. The day after the caravan stayed, I counted my people on one hand and ran out of fingers, 21 of them, and a territory that still had exactly one building to its name, mine. The rest of them had pitched tents in the dirt and called it good, the way people do when good has always been the floor and never the ceiling. I told Nathan that wouldn't hold. The nights out here came down hard and clean, the kind of cold that gets into the seams of a tent and stays. We are used to tents. He bowed his small furred head, and his tail did a quick deferential flick. You have already done too much, my lord. That was the trouble with the catkin. They had been treated like nothing for so long that kindness read to them as a debt. I waved him back a few steps instead of arguing. I knelt and put my hand flat to the dirt. The old knowledge moved through me the way it always did now, sure and quiet. And a tree came up out of the dead ground, fast, green, deliberate, and folded itself as it grew, trunk into walls, branches into a low roof, a doorway where I wanted a doorway. By the time I stood and brushed off my knees, there was a house standing where a minute ago there had been frost and nothing. Nathan made a sound that was not quite a word. Behind him, a gray tabby trader had gone completely still, whiskers forward. How much? Nathan managed. How much do we owe for nothing? I was already eyeing the next bare patch of ground. Live in it. That's payment enough. One house a day. That became the rhythm. Every morning, a new roof went up, and every morning the tails wagged a little less from fear and a little more from something I hadn't seen on them before, which was the simple animal pleasure of having somewhere warm to wake up. That night, they made a feast of it. Meat and fish in a thick stew, more food than I had eaten in one sitting since before the Great Hall, and the cold voice that had thrown me out of it. I ate with people for the first time in a long time, and was surprised how much I had missed the noise of it. Somewhere between the second bowl and the third, Nathan asked about the blueberries again, so I told them the rest, that I had grown them, that the red mana fruit beside them was mine too, raised from the same dirt under their feet. The fire popped. Nobody spoke. Then the whole circle of them was bowing at once, foreheads nearly to the dirt, and I had to tell them twice to sit back down and eat. It honestly didn't feel like such impressive magic to me, but I had learned by then that the gap between what I thought was ordinary and what the world thought was impossible was the most valuable thing I owned. I wasn't going to argue them out of being amazed. Berries alone weren't a settlement, though. A pile of miracle fruit is just a pile of fruit until someone turns it into something traded, something needed. So I sent Nathan back to Mazehold with a box of healing berries and one instruction on top of the selling. Find me a potion maker, someone good, someone who would rather work than be comfortable. He left at dawn with his tail high, like I'd handed him a quest instead of an errand. 5 days later, he came back with 4 carriages where I had sent him with one. The woman who climbed down from the lead carriage didn't introduce herself first. She lifted her chin, shut her eyes, and breathed in like the air itself was a meal. Red hair, sharp eyes, the look of someone who had been told to relax exactly once and had ignored it. Healing berries? She said to no one. I can smell them. They're everywhere. Then she seemed to remember there were people present, opened her eyes, and bowed far too fast. Forgive me, Anna, Deputy Guildmaster of the Pharmacist Guild at Mazehold, and I am completely at your service. Nathan beamed beside her, like a man presenting a prize he'd caught himself. The other 3 carriages, he explained, were entirely her equipment. I walked her past the racks of glassware to a crate of my berries and watched her hands start to shake a little. She told me her guild was sick, not with disease, with idleness. No ingredients to work with, the whole craft seizing up across the region. She had felt, in her words, like she was dying of it. I mentioned, mostly to see her face, that I knew how to make a few potions she might not have seen. Recovery, the simple ones. A confusion cure, too. She went very quiet. Then she informed me that the confusion cure had been a lost recipe for several hundred years, and would I please teach it, and she would give me anything she owned. Just live here and work, I said. More good hands make the place stronger. That's the price. She decided on the spot to move in. Population, 22. To welcome her, and frankly to welcome myself to the idea that I had people to welcome, I threw a party. I needed hands to carry the food, so I made one. I reached into the magic and pulled up something new. A warrior of wood, taller than a man, broad as a door, a slow blinking giant who came out of the ground already loyal. I called him Wood because I was tired and the name fit, and he picked up a whole table of fruit and lumbered off toward the square without dropping a single grape. I made the fruit too. Melons, strawberries, fat clusters of grapes, things these people had heard of and almost never tasted, because fruit out here was an import for the rich. The catkin gathered around the heaped tables like they couldn't decide whether to eat it or pray to it. Then somebody found a flute and somebody else found a drum, and the square filled with the kind of music that doesn't need to be good to be right. They danced. I sat back and let it happen, and somewhere in there I admitted to myself that I had forgotten this, the plain reward of building a thing and watching it fill with life. Anna got drunk on a single cup of wine and became, if anything, more articulate. She pressed a small bottle into my hands and told me what was in it. Water and a healing berry, I said, holding it to the lantern. Nice color. Her eyes went round. She had not expected the Lord to read a potion off the shelf at a glance, and she said so, loudly, several times. We ended up talking craft until the fire burned low, her complaining that the guild had become all theory and no making, me listening and learning the shape of what I'd just hired. The next morning, I went to make potions with her properly. She watched me work, and her professional calm fell off her face piece by piece. I heated the berries and filtered them and heated them again, and I never once reached for the herbs stacked at her elbow. To her, that was like watching someone bake bread without flour. That's not the method, she said. That's not the method anyone is taught. I handed her the finished bottle, blue and clear as deep water. She drank it, and whatever was left of her hangover left with it, and she stared at me like I'd rearranged the furniture in her head. The wild berries she knew, she explained, were small and pale and weak. You had to mix in expensive herbs just to drag a real potion out of them. Mine came out perfect every time, so the whole costly middle of the process simply vanished. With ingredients like these, she said, we could have the entire Pharmacist Guild leaning our way inside a season. That was the part I cared about, not the leaning, the leverage. A dead territory with nothing to offer is ignored. A territory that is the only place in the region still making medicine is a place people come to. So we wrote letters. Anna drafted them, and I shaped the offer. A house, waiting, and free. Real work. Taxes no worse than the cities. 2 days of rest a week, and no one breaking your back past dark. To a guild full of skilled people with nothing to do and no way to eat. It read like a fairy tale with an address. Over the next days, the shelves filled. Rows of blue potions, crates of fruit, more than one cart could hold. Wood stacked it all without complaint, lifting loads 3 men couldn't. He had been silent when I made him, grunts mostly. But that morning, hefting the last crate, he turned to me and said, "Clear as anything? Lots of people will come, for sure." I stopped. It wasn't the sentence. It was what the sentence meant. When I'd raised him, he hadn't been able to manage words at all, and the only thing that had changed was me. My magic was deeper than it had been a month ago. Casting cost me less. What I made came out smarter. The loop was still feeding itself, quietly, every single day. I told Nathan to take the letters and the loaded carts back to Mazehold. He saluted with a paw, which no one had taught him, and rolled out toward the mountain road. I watched the dust of him go and let myself think, for just a moment, about a great hall I had been thrown out of, and a man there who had called this land dead and meant it as the last word on me. He still didn't know. None of them did. That was fine. I wasn't going to be the one who sent word. They could be the ones who eventually came looking. The village had more than 20 houses by then, so I'd started walking the edges of it each morning, planning where it would grow next. On one of those walks, a brown-furred catkin came bolting up to me. Bruno, Nathan's stand-in while he traveled, named the way they all named themselves. Plainly, after the color of his coat. There was a statue, he said, in one of the new houses. He didn't like it. It was a girl carved in wood, half sunk into the wall as if the tree had grown up around her, life-sized. Every fold of clothing detailed, a face too gentle to be an accident. Bruno told me it was a charm people bought in the city, a likeness of Stella, the hero, an elf, S rank, one of the legends who had marched against the old Dark Lord and never come back from it. What Bruno didn't like was that the carving had a faint pulse of magic in it. To a catkin with no power of his own, that hummed wrong. He all but begged me to take it off his hands, so I agreed to move it home and display it. I set my palm to the wall and told the great tree to give her up. "Move," I said. The magic caught and slipped, like a key turning in the wrong lock. It had never done that. I frowned, gathered myself, pushed harder, and the statue moved on its own. Wood became skin. The carved face drew a long, shaking breath, and a very real, very tired voice came out of it. "Free," she whispered. "I'm finally free." Bruno yowled and jumped behind my leg. I'll admit my heart went sideways too, but she was still half caught in the wall, an actual living person pinned in the timber, and that decided it for me before I'd finished being shocked. "You're not saved yet," I told her. "You're still stuck. Hold on. I'll get the wall to let you go." This time, when I worked the magic, it answered, and the tree eased its grip and set her down on her feet. She was golden-haired and slight and unsteady, pointed ears, eyes that hadn't seen open daylight in a long time. She thanked me, and then thanked me again, and then apologized for thanking me too much, which told me more about her than any legend could have. I didn't leave a stranger trapped in my wall, and I wasn't going to leave one shaking on her feet either. I walked her out into the light. I took her to Anna, who checked her over with brisk, careful hands and pronounced her healthy, if a little underfed. Then we sat her down and asked the obvious thing. "How does a hero end up sleeping inside a wall?" "A cursed pendant," she said, "a relic out of the old war. It took a person's magic and turned it into raw stamina, but it carried curses too, scattered and random, and the one it laid on her had turned her slowly to wood. She had stood frozen so long that the earth had buried her, and a tree had grown up through the place she stood. My house. My magic, she guessed, was the kind that cancels that sort of curse the way two waves meet and flatten each other. She'd been freed by accident, by me planting a home on top of her grave. She talked about it lightly, called it a long nap, smiled when she said it. I didn't believe the lightness for a second. Nobody stands still for years and walks out of it whole, but I let her keep the smile if she wanted it. I did need to be sure of who she was. Legends are cheap. A stranger with power in my village was not something I'd take on a stranger's word. The stories said Stella's strength could crush a dragon's scale between two fingers. So I grew a block of ebony up out of the floor, black, dense, the hardest wood I knew, and asked her, politely, to prove it. She closed her hand around it. There was no strain in her face at all. The ebony did not crack or split. It simply stopped being a block and became a fall of black dust through her fingers. Bruno breathed a soft tuff, and Anna forgot to be professional. I kept my face still, but something in me went quietly alert, because she looked almost embarrassed, and she said the dragon story wasn't even right, that the truth was a good deal more than that. She had just shown me a feat out of legend and called it the modest version. I filed that away. Whatever the world thought Stella was, she was more, and she was standing in my workshop trying not to take up space. I told her she was free. The curse was gone, her body was her own, and she could walk back into the world as the adventurer she'd been whenever she liked. I meant it as a kindness. I watched it land on her like a door closing. So instead, she asked very quietly, with her hands knotted together, whether she might stay, if it wasn't a bother, if there was room. Here is the thing I've learned about people the world has used up. You can offer them shelter and they'll hear charity. You can offer them work and they'll hear a debt. There is exactly one word that doesn't come with a hook in it, and I gave it to her on purpose. You're not a guest, I said. You're not a debt either. Stay because you want to. You're my friend. She went still. Her eyes filled and she pressed her lips together hard, the way you do when a small, ordinary kindness lands on a place that hasn't been touched in years. A friend. I don't think anyone had called her that in a very long time. Maybe I meant it clean. Maybe part of me knew exactly what an S-rank hero was worth to a young lord with enemies he couldn't see yet. With me, it was usually both at once, and I'd stop pretending otherwise. It didn't make the word less true. Later, a little, she let some of it out. A man she had once been promised to, who walked away because she was the stronger of the two, and he couldn't bear it. And under that, almost in passing, the older thing, that her name had made her enemies as easily as friends. Somewhere out there, she said, was an order of proud knights who revered a great warrior she had once put down in single combat, and they had never forgiven her for it. They were not the forgiving kind. She said it the way you mention old weather, like it was finished and far away. I didn't tell her I'd heard it differently. Things that are finished don't get carved into statues and sold as charms. But I let it lie. She wanted to be a quiet clam in a quiet shell, she said. And after the life she'd had, I wasn't going to be the one to tell her the sea doesn't work like that. A few days later, Nathan came home, and he did not come home quietly. Anna saw it first and named the equipment carts from a mile off. Guild gear, she said. The kind they didn't move for nothing. Then the rest of it crested the rise. Wagon after wagon, riders strung out along the mountain road. A column of people that didn't end where I expected it to end. 50 of them, near enough. Wood, beside me, watched the dust with the patient certainty of a thing that had already predicted it. Nathan rode ahead and all but fell off his mount in his hurry to report. Every single one of them, he said, breathless and proud, had come to live and work here. Adventurers who'd heard the dungeon runners could finally buy potions again. Pharmacists with nothing left to make in the city. One old man in a white coat leaned out of a cart, spotted Anna, and announced that since there was no work left at the guild, he'd be in her care now. I stood there and did the arithmetic without meaning to. 30 fighters, 20 makers, and the hero already at my side. 73 people, where a season ago there had been one, on land my own father had handed me as a death sentence and an insult. I felt the old want stir under the satisfaction. Quiet, patient, not gone. They still didn't know what was growing out here. The man who'd thrown me away still believed he'd thrown away nothing. He'd find out. Not because I'd go and tell him, because one day the thing I was building would get too large to look away from, and the people who had crossed a floor to cast me out would have to cross a great deal more to take it back. For now, there was a village to house, and a column of new lives rolling up my road in the sun. I had a pharmacist arguing dosages, a wooden giant who'd learned to hope out loud, and a legend standing at my shoulder who only wanted to be ordinary. It was, by any measure my father would have understood, the most worthless thing a son of his had ever built. I had never in my life been prouder of anything. 73 people. That was the number the day Nathan's caravan came home. And I remember standing on the border road thinking it was a crowd. Within a single season, it would look like nothing at all. It started in the western forest. I had gone in to gather samples, Wood clearing the brush ahead of me and Bruno riding his shoulder. And somewhere along the way, I let the old knowledge open behind my eyes. The forest laid itself out for me, every root and leaf named at a glance. That was how I found the giant tree. 5 stories of it, bare as winter, dead to the last branch. Ugo Ugo, Wood pointed. That big tree. A door opened in the dead trunk, and out stepped something small, with a white rose blooming where her hair should have been. She had a child's voice and a child's bounce to her, and she greeted me like we were old friends. Bruno nearly fell off Wood's shoulder. A dryad, he whispered, like the word itself was holy. None had been seen in his kingdom for over 100 years. Tessa, she called herself. Her people had nowhere left to go now that their tree had died. They wanted to live together, all of them, under one roof the way they always had, and there was no clearing wide enough left in the forest to grow another giant. I knelt and put my hand to the soil. A small treehouse rose out of nothing in front of her, walls and a window in the space of a breath. Wow, her flower trembled. That's amazing. I can make one as tall as the one you lost, I said. I just need the room to do it. I told her there was plenty of room where I lived. She sniffed at me, decided I smelled like a person who talked to plants. And that, apparently, was enough. Back home, I emptied myself into the ground. A trunk came up thick as a watchtower and kept climbing. 5 floors of living wood spiraling toward the sky, and 30 dryads poured into it like water finding its level. The great tree tower. the villagers started calling it. It became the tallest thing for miles. Nathan came sprinting across the field so fast he forgot to breathe. When he got his words back, he told me what I had just taken in. Dryads were one of the few things in this world that could grow heelberries with their bare hands. No magic at all. Half the medicine in the realm, he said, half of everything, started in dryad soil. I had been growing the rarest berry in the region by hand, and now I had 30 gardeners who could do it in their sleep. They proved it the next morning, and not the way I expected. Wood plowed a field for them, and the whole tower emptied out and buried themselves in the fresh dirt up to their necks. Every last one, faces tipped to the sun like a row of contented flowers. It is a soil bath, I told Wood when he tilted his head at them. He thought about that, then lay down and joined them, asleep before he hit the ground. I would have laughed it off as a quirk. Then I noticed what the dirt did afterward. Wherever a dryad had lain, the soil came back wrong. Too rich, too alive. Seeds dropped into it climbed in days instead of months. Ignored the season entirely. Ripened out of turn. I crouched at the edge of that field and felt the floor of what this place could become drop out from under me. There was no ceiling to it that I could see. There was only further up. The lake gave up its secret next. Nothing lived in it but rainbow fish, shy things that no adventurer could land. And the moment I shaped a trap from the reeds and baited it with Tessa's grass dumplings, they swarmed it like the water was boiling. The fish themselves were useless on a plate. The scales they shed, though, the ones that fell on their own, those were fertilizer worth more than the gold to buy them. Tessa wanted one for a different reason. She held an orange scale up to the light, drooled openly, and asked if she could eat it. I handed it over. She crunched it down like a biscuit, sighed, and the rose on her head bloomed visibly larger between one breath and the next. Now I can fix the soil, she said, delighted, even without touching it. A bigger flower, she explained, meant a stronger dryad, and a stronger dryad meant a richer earth. So I caught fish. I caught a great many fish, and I fed her scales by the handful, and her flower kept opening, and the fields kept answering. Every cozy thing in that village was quietly making it more dangerous to underestimate. I sent Stella to the city to be our face. I did not go myself, and I told myself it was strategy. The truth was simpler. My father had ordered me to stay on the dead land until it was worth something, and some small stubborn part of me intended to obey the letter of it while I broke the spirit in half. So Stella went in my place, with Nathan and Anna beside her, and they told me how it went when they returned. The road into Mazehold was lined with bronze statues, and every one of them was her. She had founded the place centuries ago before the world turned her into a legend and then forgot she was a person. She had spent so long being a statue that she had nearly stopped being anything else. The moment she saw herself cast in metal at the gate, something in her straightened, and she walked in like the hero the plaques all claimed she was. The 3 great guilds of the city signed with us together, adventurers and pharmacists and blacksmiths, names on one page in gold dust. Their potions were failing, their healers were collapsing from the shortage, and the only place left in the region still turning out clean, perfect medicine was a wasteland that a duke had thrown his son onto to die. Carts started rolling our way before the ink was dry. The city asked for an official name for the partnership papers. I thought about it for an evening and chose the obvious one, Hillberry Village. Everyone agreed it fit, and Anna painted the signboards herself. One of them, a careful little picture of a buried dryad, so the newcomers would stop fainting at the sight. The soil baths turned into the strangest thing of all. Grown adventurers paid to bury themselves in dryad dirt because they swore it left their skin glowing and their backs unknotted, and word spread down the road faster than the medicine did. Get buried in Heelberry, people started saying, and you come out younger. We were a health resort now. I had not planned that. I was beginning to suspect I could not plan fast enough to keep up with my own village. Even the guildmaster came to see for herself. Leah ran the whole adventurers guild in the city, a tall, sharp-eyed woman who had clawed her way to the top on skill alone, and she walked my fields with her mouth slightly open the entire time. When she caught sight of the soil baths, she went quiet, then asked, almost shyly, whether she might try one. I told her she was welcome. By the time she left, the population had climbed past 100 and kept going. 143 souls, the last count said. A wasteland with a population of 1 turned into a wonder the realm's own guildmasters traveled days to stand in. I will admit it, I was proud. The people kept coming, and they kept being the kind the world had no use for. Stella came to me one evening, twisting her hands, and asked if she might invite her own scattered kin to settle here. Elves were wanderers, she said, always had been, looking for a place with trees and quiet and food that grew from the ground. She had never had one to offer them before. "Bring them," I said. "There's room." I do not think she had expected a yes. She looked at me for a long moment, like the word had landed somewhere deep, and then she nodded fast and turned away so I would not see her face. That same night, the whole village ended up eating together. It started as a celebration over a fresh batch of fertilizer soil. Of all things, the dryads burying themselves in it, while the catkin lit fires and the adventurers dragged out tables, and somehow it swelled until half the territory was crowded around the flames. I grew baked apples and bananas out of the air for anyone who wanted them, and people did by the dozen. I stood at the edge of it for a moment, plate in hand. It struck me that I had never once, in this entire world, eaten a meal with this many people who were glad I was there. My old house had a long table too. No one at it had ever looked happy to see me. I went and sat down in the noise and the smoke and let myself belong to it. And on the other side of that pride, far away, in a hall I could still see with my eyes closed, my family had not thought about me even once. I learned the shape of it later, but I knew it in my bones even then. My father, on the rare occasion my name came up at all, waved it off the way you wave off a smell. The fourth son, the embarrassment. He had given the boy a dead territory and a single instruction, and the boy had gone silent. And silence, to a man like my father, meant only one thing: failure. He assumed I had crawled into some corner to rot, too ashamed even to send word home. My brothers, if they remembered I existed, agreed. Their contempt was perfectly intact. It was also, by then, completely wrong, and they had no reason on earth to suspect it. Distance protected the lie. So did their pride. They would not lower themselves to look, and so they would not see. And the not seeing suited me fine. For now, I was not going to be the one to tell them. Let the truth reach them on its own legs when it was too big to wave away. I came back to the square at the end of one of those long days, and there was Wood in the middle of it, swinging a stick. Stella had been training him. There was a monster in the city's labyrinth, a thing of moving lightning the guild had never beaten. And Wood, being made of wood, simply did not care about being electrocuted. So she taught him to knock the bolts out of the air like a child at a ball game, and he loved it more than anything I had ever made him do. My first creation, the silent helper who once could not say a word, was turning into something that could guard the people I now had to protect. Tessa wandered past with a fresh scale in her cheek, her flower wide and white in the lantern light. The fields glowed behind her. The tower threw its long shadow across all of it. A year ago, I had knelt in dead dirt with a population of 1. Now there was a name on the maps where there had been nothing. A name guildmasters spoke out loud. A name climbing toward the kind of weight that travels. It would travel home eventually. It would have to. And when it did, the men who threw me away would have to stand in front of what I had grown and say, out loud, with witnesses, that they had been wrong about everything. They still owed me that. They did not even know the debt existed yet. I could wait. I had a whole world to build while they caught up. By the time the leaves turned, my name was on the maps, and I had stopped waiting for the men who gave it to me to come and read it. I had a village instead. I had fields that glowed faintly at dusk, and a tower that breathed when the wind moved through it, and most days, that was enough. Then the wagon came up the road, and the rest of it started. Stella climbed down first, the way she always did, neat and quiet, like she was apologizing to the ground for stepping on it. Behind her came Wood. He had gone into the deep labyrinth, a sapling I was half afraid to send, and he came back something else. He stood straighter. He moved like he knew exactly how much of the world he could carry now. He did well, Stella said. She did not look at me when she said it, which was how I knew she meant it. In the lowest dark, there was a guardian forged out of thunder. We could not get past it, so we threw stones at it until it fell, the way you taught me. Wood stood at my shoulder the whole time. He never once flinched. My first child, the thing I had grown out of grief and boredom on a dead patch of land, had become a shield. I put my hand flat against his bark and felt the slow warmth under it, and I did not say anything, because there was nothing small enough to say. Stella was holding something wrapped in cloth against her chest. She peeled the corner back. Inside sat a smooth, rounded stone the size of 2 fists, and it was not any color a stone should be. It held every color at once, shifting where the light touched it. We found it at the very bottom, she said. I thought it was pretty. I went still. In another life, I had hunted a thing exactly like this for the better part of a season, and never once held one. It is not a stone, I told her. It is a cockatrice queen's egg. I grew the place to hold her before I let myself think too hard about what I was doing. A press of my hand into the dirt behind the tower, the old knowledge moving through me, and a stable rose out of the ground in living wood, 3 times the size of a house, and shaded against the heat the way her kind would need. Wood carried in the straw. I prepared the solution Anna had mixed for me, brushed it across the shell, and then I poured magic into the egg. A great deal of magic, more than I had ever fed into anything living. I emptied myself into that shell until my hands shook and the colors in it began to pulse like something breathing in its sleep. The last part was not mine to do. Only a person with the taming gift could finish it, and Stella had earned that gift in the labyrinth without ever meaning to, feeding wild cockatrices grass dumplings until the world decided she was their friend. She wore a coat of cockatrice down that had cost more than the wagon it arrived in, and she lay down in the straw and gathered the egg against her like it was already a child. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, without looking up, she told me something she had clearly never told anyone. When I was small, she said, before any of the rest of it, all I wanted was to raise one of these. That was the whole dream. Just that. Her thumb moved over the shell. I never thought I would get it. I had been collected by this woman the way you collect strays, and somewhere in the last year, she had collected me back. I sat down in the straw across from her and kept watch over the egg until the lantern burned low. 2 mornings later, the shell cracked. It did not break the way an egg breaks. It opened deliberately, a seam of light running around it, and then a small, wet bundle of pale gold down tumbled out into Stella's hands and shook itself dry. Round black eyes, a beak no bigger than my thumbnail, a faint shimmer of color sliding through the down whenever she turned her head, the last of the rainbow she had been. She looked at Stella, she looked at me, and then she opened that tiny beak and spoke. "Papa," she said. "Mama." Stella froze with her mouth open. I will admit that for a second I did too. Cockatrices do not talk. Nothing I knew said they talked. This one tipped her head at our silence like we were the strange ones, and chirped it again, pleased with herself, until Stella made a sound that was half laugh and half sob, and pulled her in close. The little queen pressed her face into the down at Stella's collar, and sighed like she had been waiting her whole short life to do exactly that. "She needs a name," Stella whispered. I had been turning one over since the egg first pulsed under my hands. "Dahlia," I said. "It means sun in the old elven tongue." Stella looked at me like I had pulled it out of the sky. "Of course it does," she murmured. Dahlia twisted her head around, fixed those black eyes on me, and went very still in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I felt her attention move over me, careful and exact, the way a jeweler weighs a stone. She was reading my magic, not how much of it there was. Anyone could feel that, but what it was made of, the shape and the grain of it. She read me down to the bottom in the space of a breath and decided she approved. I had built a village out of spite and good soil. I had a guardian, a hero, a hall full of people who were glad I existed. I had never once, in either life, had something that came into the world already certain I belonged to it. "Hello, Dahlia," I said, and my voice did something I had not given it permission to do. I carried her home wrapped in a blanket, and the first thing she did was meet Wood. She went rigid in my arms when she saw him, and I braced for fear. Instead, she squirmed loose, fluttered straight to his great wooden shoulder, and pressed her head against the side of his face. "Same as Papa," she announced. Inside, same, she had felt it, that Wood was grown of my magic, that he carried the same grain she had read in me. She decided what that made him on the spot. "Big brother." Wood went very quiet, the way he did when something mattered. Then he lifted one enormous hand and stroked her down with a single careful finger. "Little sister," he said, and if a tree can sound proud, he did. So that was the household, settled in an afternoon. A father who had been told he was worth nothing. A mother who had been worshipped as a legend and lonely the whole time. A son grown from a seed. A daughter hatched from a stone. None of us belonged anywhere the world had put us, which was, I was beginning to think, the only thing any of us had in common, and somehow it was enough. Stella moved her things in that same day to help raise her. We were both very brisk and grown up about the arrangement. We set rules. Wood would sleep between us like a wall, which suited everyone and embarrassed no one. She would not, she promised solemnly, drink in the house. I would do the cooking, because the food in this region was salted like it owed someone money, and I refused to feed a newborn anything I would not eat myself. That first dinner, I made spaghetti while Dahlia napped in a basket, and Wood laid the table, and Stella tried to help, and mostly got in the way. The table was fuller than any table I had eaten at in my life. I thought just once and then put it away, about the long cold table I had grown up at, where the seat they gave me was an insult, and the silence was the point. Then Dahlia woke up shouting that she was hungry, and there was no more room in me for the old table at all. She grew like the village grew, which is to say, faster than was strictly reasonable. Within a week, she doubled in size. Within 2, I could no longer cup her in my hands and had to carry her in the crook of my arm. She followed me everywhere on her 2 large feet, naming the world as she found it, deciding loudly which of it she liked. She liked the soil baths, until I told her a careful lie about them being a cure for a terrible curse, because the last thing I needed was a queen of the cockatrices catching cold in the mud. The village kept doing what it had always done. It gathered the thrown away. Stella's wandering elves began drifting in, a few at a time, looking for trees and a place to stop walking. The dryads made the fields impossible. The fame I had stopped chasing kept arriving on its own, so much of it that the Great Guild sent one of its rare high-ranked mages all the way out to look at us, a sharp young woman they had stuffed into a ridiculous chirping bird hat as some kind of advertisement. Dahlia adored her on sight and refused to believe she was not a very large cousin. The mage, to her credit, gave up arguing within the hour. There was a thing I never let myself forget under all of it. The family that had thrown me out still did not know my name had grown teeth. I could have written. I could have sent word south and watched them choke on it. I never did. Let it reach them on its own legs, I told myself, when it is too big for any of them to wave away. I had waited this long. I could keep building while they caught up. The trouble, when it came dressed as an ordinary afternoon. Tessa had the dryads making grass dumplings, the way they always did. Rows of small flower-headed people, kneading and humming and eating roughly half of everything they produced. Dahlia watched them with naked envy. She had eaten plenty of dumplings. She had never been allowed to make one. I want to, she told me, drawing herself up to her full unimpressive height. I want to make. I should have known better than to say yes to a creature who could read the grain of magic and had no idea yet how much of it she had. Go on then, I said. Show me how you need. Dahlia scrunched up her whole small body, reached for something inside herself that none of us could see, and pushed. The air in the tower folded. There was a hard pulse of red light. No smoke and no fire. Just a sudden weight pressing on the ears. And where there had been empty floor a moment before, a figure now knelt on one knee, tall, wrapped in armor the deep red of banked coals. Long silver hair spilling over the shoulders, pale skin, eyes like 2 chips of winter. A demon, and not a small one, down on one knee in the middle of a dumpling party. I knew the face. In another life, it had been a name spoken low, a thing tied to the war that ended an age. I am the Marquis of the Pit, he announced to the room, grand and grave. The contract of the Demon King has passed to you. Command me, my lord. My strength has not returned to me, but I will spend every drop I have. The whole tower had stopped. Tessa held a dumpling halfway to her mouth. Dahlia toddled up to this ancient horror, looked him dead in his winter eyes, and pointed one fluffy wing at the table. Need, she said. Marcus did not move for a very long moment. I beg your pardon, he said. He knelt at the low table and kneaded grass dumplings because his master had told him to. And within minutes, the Marquis of the Pit was sweating and trembling and out of breath. That was when I understood what had happened. He had been summoned with nothing. No mana, no strength, reset all the way down to the very bottom. Level 1, weaker than the smallest child in the village. When I asked him what he remembered, he stopped his clumsy kneading and looked at me with an expression I knew far too well from my own mirror. My name, he said quietly. Only my name. Everything else is gone. Stella came in then, called by one of the dryads, and the moment she saw him, she went white. She knew him, not as an enemy, as something stranger than that. She told me later, away from the others, the truth that almost no one alive carries, that long ago, this demon had turned on the Demon King himself, and that the war which closed an age had only been won because he did. The histories say a hero felled the Demon King. The histories leave him out on purpose. He did not know her at all. He looked at the woman who had stood beside him at the end of the world and saw a stranger and went back to congratulating Dahlia on her dumpling. Here was the part I kept to myself. A creature like that does not stay weak forever. As Dahlia grew, his strength would come back to him, and one day, the memory would come back with it. And no one in this warm, bright tower could tell me what would wake when it did. I sheltered him anyway. I knew the argument against it. He might be a danger sleeping in my house, and I was choosing to feed him and let my daughter call him hers because right now he was pitiful and harmless and had nowhere to go. I had been pitiful and harmless and had nowhere to go once, and the people who owed me everything had thrown me out into the cold to prove a point. I was not going to be them, not for anyone. You can stay, I told the demon. Make yourself useful and keep your master happy. We will worry about the rest of it when it comes. Marcus bowed his silver head almost to the floor, and Dahlia climbed onto his back like he was furniture, and Tessa handed him another lump of grass to knead. I only learned the rest of it later, the way you learn anything about a house that has decided you are dead to it. Far to the south, in the hall I had been thrown out of, a merchant came through with the season's gossip and left a strange piece of it behind. There was a village, he said, on a stretch of dead land everyone knew had been worthless for 100 years. It was not worthless anymore. It was the only place in the region still making good medicine. It had a tower that grew out of the ground, and a resort people paid gold to visit. And, the merchant swore, a talking monster the Great Guild had sent an S-ranked mage to study. My father heard it the way he heard everything that did not flatter him. He waved it off. Coincidence, exaggeration, some other man's luck. The dead land he had banished his failure son to could not possibly be the dead land in the story. He did not even ask the name of the Lord, but my brothers asked. Harold, the careful one, the Lord, turned it over and went quiet. Bennett, newly raised to command the kingdom's proudest order of knights, frowned at a map for longer than the matter seemed to deserve. Neither of them said my name out loud. Neither of them was ready to. But for the first time since the gate closed behind me, the house that threw me away felt a small cold draft of unease and could not quite say where it came from. I had a daughter who had named me the moment she saw me. I had a son made of living wood and a sleeping truth made of silver hair and a hall full of people the world had also discarded. And far to the south, at last, faintly, the family that decided I was nothing had begun to look up from their cold, long table and wonder. They could take their time. I had everything I needed while they caught up. Far to the south, the family that had called me nothing was only just beginning to look up and wonder. I let them wonder. There was a forest in front of me, and the forest had teeth I had not met yet. I walked the party deeper than any adventurer had gone, opening the way as I went. The old knowledge moved through my hands the way it always did, and the trees leaned aside and laid a path down for us, soft and wide enough for two. Dahlia rode in the pocket over my chest, small and warm, narrating the whole expedition in her chirping little tongue. Wood came behind me, patient as a wall that had decided to walk. Marcus jumped at every insect with more legs than he approved of. We had come for the cockatrice the sisters in the forest were hiding, and we found her at a spring wide as a village pond, a small stone hut beside it. The two of them, thin and pale-feathered, clung together when they saw us, then went boneless with relief once Dahlia chirped that we were friends. One of them pressed close to me and made a sound that turned the whole forest cold. "She is saying the flowers are walking," Dahlia translated, and her cheer was gone. "She says run. She says live." I reached out with the sense that reads green things, and the forest answered with a number that did not belong in a place this quiet. Flowers, hundreds of them, then hundreds more, a colony of them spreading toward the water in a slow, patient tide, and at the dead center of it, something larger and older that the smaller ones bent around like soldiers around a flag. 1,000 of them, I said, maybe more, flower archers, and a general somewhere in the middle holding the whole thing together. Stella did not flinch. She crouched, picked a fallen branch off the path, and tested its weight in her hand, like a woman choosing a tool she already trusted. "Then I will hit every seed they throw back into their faces," she said. "Lead the sisters home. Leave the flowers to me." We brought the sisters home first. A colony that size was not a thing 7 people cleared on a whim, and I had learned the hard way that pride is the most expensive thing a small place can carry. So I did the careful thing. I wrote to the guild in the Labyrinth City and laid the whole of it out plain. 1,000 flowers at our door, a passage under the forest that might run all the way to their famous dungeon. 2 days, that was all it took. I expected a letter back and got an army instead. Leah came up the road at the head of 50 adventurers, and on her head sat a fluffy cockatrice hat with a little string that made it peep when she pulled it. She pulled it the instant she saw Dahlia, without a shred of hesitation, purely to win my daughter's good opinion. Dahlia approved enormously. "Long time, my lord," Leah called, grinning. "I read your letter, so I brought 50 friends." She talked fast and thought faster. A colony that threatened a region was an emergency. The guild ranked at the very top, she told me, the kind that normally swallowed months. She offered me 1 week if we threw the whole village into it together, and a fair split of everything the forest gave up. I had one condition only. "The boss is mine when it falls," I said, "and I fight on the line, not behind it." She studied me a moment, the grin softening into something more careful, then stuck out her hand. "Wise of you. Done?" The next morning, the plan came with the dawn, and most of it was supply. I am not a swordsman. What I am is a man who can grow what an army needs faster than an army can spend it. In Anna's workshop, I grew the wood for tower shields straight out of the air, flat and broad as doors, a fresh one every few minutes, until my hands ached pleasantly and the stack reached the rafters. I could not picture the handle of all things, so the adventurers fixed those themselves. Anna and every other apothecary in the village brewed fire potions by the crate, little glass bulbs that burst into flame on a flower's weak point. and ended it. Leah laid the enemy out for me like a board game. 1,000 flowers, 300 of them ringed the general in a wall that never moved. The other 700 roamed in patrols that rerouted the moment a scout went quiet, drawing tighter the longer we pushed, until at the end, they would gather in one place to crush whatever had come this far. 10 scouts to map the patrols, the rest to grind the 700 down, day by day, never at night, because in the dark, the flowers barely moved, yet still struck true by sound alone, and that was a fight no sane person took. 1 week, she had promised, and watching her draw it out in clean lines, I believed her. She was clever, and clever people notice things. Halfway through the morning, she tipped her head at Marcus, who was on the floor, letting Dahlia teach him her chirping language, and said his name reminded her of an old demon out of the myths, a marquis of the lower halls who sometimes wore the shape of a silver-haired beauty. My stomach dropped through the floor. Then she laughed and waved it off. Old families named children after demons for luck, she said, and went back to her schedule. I let out a breath I had no plan to be caught holding. The truth sleeping in my house could keep sleeping a while longer. Stella ran the adventurers through a drill before the campaign opened, and it was a strange one to watch. She lined the new arrivals up and threw soft balls at them, fast as a slung stone, the exact speed a flower archer spits its seed. Catch it, she told them. Read it. Learn the speed in your hands so the real thing never surprises you. Wood stood beside her and plucked each return out of the air like he was picking fruit. The veterans, men who had killed flowers by the 100, laughed in disbelief that throwing a ball was suddenly a battle skill, and then went quiet when they understood it was keeping them alive. What no one did, Stella told me later with a sigh, was try to hit the ball back. She had wanted, just once, for someone to swing. So that night, I made her something. I had carried the shape of it in my head from another life, a length of hard maple turned and balanced to a standard no smith in this world had ever been asked to meet. And it took a stack of failures before the grain came out right. In the morning, I put it in her hands. Try not to break this one, I said, but if you do, I know how to make more now. She turned it over once, feeling the weight settle, and the look on her face was the same one Dahlia gets in front of a full plate. Lord Adrian, she breathed, it is perfect. The campaign opened, and I held the command post. I grew shields all day at the old Dryad's house, 10 an hour without pausing for breath, while the scouts moved through the high branches like black water and read the smoke signals that told us where the patrols had drifted. A scout leader watched me conjure a shield out of nothing and could not stop talking about it. I told him the truth, that they were only wood and held no special power and would never sell for much, and he looked at me like I had said something holy. Out on the line, Stella and Wood were a storm with 2 bodies. She read every seed the flowers fired and sent them screaming back where they came from, and the maple held, swing after full strength swing, where every weapon before it had folded. Wood threw stones the size of fists into the flower heads and walked through their volleys untouched, his bark too tough to notice them. Then a bigger flower came. A sniper, the veterans called it, head 3 times the size of the rest, the captain of 200, and it picked Stella out of the whole field as the one thing worth killing. Its seed left the stem fast enough to punch through armor. For half a heartbeat, gold ran down her arms. I had never seen the like, and it was gone before I was sure I had. She turned the sniper's own shot around so hard it took the thing apart at the root, and then the gold was gone, and she was only smiling, asking the field whether the game was getting closer to its peak. By the time the light went orange, we had cleared close to a quarter of the colony in a single day, and not one of ours had a wound worth a potion. The days after went the same way, until they didn't. The patrols thinned. We pushed inward, toward the wall of 300 and the thing it guarded, and that was when the scouts started coming back wrong. Not hurt, worse than hurt, shaken. They spoke in low voices about men going down in the deep ranks with no seed in sight, no flower close enough, nothing to point at. The general, they said, fired a shot that no eye in the world could follow. A bullet made of magic. You did not see it leave. You did not see it cross. You only saw where it landed after. One veteran kept rubbing his thumb against his fingers as he talked, like a man making sure the rest of him was still there. I sent him to the earth bath and told him to stay until the shaking left his hands. Stella went forward to meet it herself, because if anyone could, it was her. She came back at dusk for the first time in this whole war with her shoulders low. I can feel it leave, she said, sitting heavily by the fire. Something pushes the air. I can throw myself out of the way, most of it. She turned the maple over in her hands, slow, and would not look at it. But I cannot hit back what I cannot see. I swing where I think it should be, and there is nothing there. I have always been able to see the ball. The whole point of her, the thing that made her a wall the village could stand behind, was that she returned everything thrown at her, and the boss had built itself, on purpose or by luck, to be the one thing she could not return. A clock had started ticking. Every day we did not break the general was a day the 700 had to gather and come for the people sleeping in my houses. I told her to rest. Then I sat up with the problem. I sat at my own table most of that night, while the house breathed around me, Dahlia asleep in her straw nest, and I turned the thing over the way Stella had turned the bat. We had all been treating it as a seeing problem. Find a way to see the bullet, paint it, slow it, light it up. Every answer down that road was a wall, so I stopped asking how to see it and asked what it actually was. A thing that crossed a gap of air at a fixed speed, on a straight line, the instant after it left. Sight was only one way to know where a thing is. It was not the only one. A bat hung on a wire over a cave does not see the moth it eats. It shouts and listens to the shape the shout comes back in, and it never misses. Stella's ears were not human ears. She was an elf, with hearing that had picked the air push of an invisible shot out of an entire battlefield. She did not need to see the bullet. She needed to hear where the world had stopped being empty, and she needed her body to already be swinging when the answer arrived, because there was no time to decide. Not a reaction, a rhythm, a swing that was already on its way, like a weight on a string that falls through the same low arc every time, so that the only thing left to choose was the instant of contact. Sight had failed her. Sound and timing would not. I had the shape of it by the time the lamp burned low, and for the first time since the scouts came back wrong, the clock did not feel like it was winning. In the morning, I put two things in her hands. The first was a pair of hard wooden clackers, the kind that crack out a sharp bright note and throw it across an open space. Throw the sound, I told her. Let it run out ahead of you and listen for the place it comes back changed, where it strikes something the eye says is not there. She frowned at them, then closed her eyes and threw the note, and on the third try, her head snapped a fraction toward a stone I had set out where no stone should ring. There, she whispered. I heard it. It was there. The second thing was the swing itself. Not a strike she chose, a pendulum, low and even, the maple already falling through the same arc before the thread arrived. So her body did the math her eyes could not, and her ears only had to say now. We drilled it under the gray sky until the clack of wood and the catch of the ear became one motion, over and over. Wood lobbing blind shots from behind a screen, so she never saw them leave. She was an elf, and she was a legend. And once she stopped fighting the thing she could not do and trusted the thing she could, she ate the impossible whole. By midday, she was returning Wood's hidden throws without a single open eye. Out on the line, the count kept climbing, the 700 thinning toward the wall of 300 and the general behind it. The boss was still standing, but the one weapon it had built to beat us did not work anymore, and the woman it had been built to stop now smiled every time she thought about meeting it. I watched her practice and let myself feel, just for a moment, the size of what I had made out of dead land. A daughter asleep in her nest, a son of living wood throwing soft pitches into the gray, a hero who broke mithril swords and finally had something that did not break, and a home worth the war we were about to win for it. The family that threw me away had begun at last to look up and wonder. They could keep wondering. I was not ready to be found yet, and when I was, it would be on my terms and no one else's. For now, I had everything I needed and a general to break. Stella was awake before me, which never happened. By the time I came down the stairs, she was already at the table, sitting too straight, both hands flat on the wood, staring at the middle distance with a focus I had only ever seen her wear on the line. Her bat leaned against the chair beside her like a third guest. The morning she had been counting toward for weeks had finally come, and she had met it with her eyes wide open and a fire banked low behind them. Good morning, I said. She turned her head a fraction. Good morning, just that, quiet. A flame with the lid pressed down on it. We were halfway through breakfast when the door banged open and the whole noisy heart of the house came spilling in. Marcus first, holding the door like a herald announcing a king. Then, the two cockatrice sisters, Fluff bouncing, and Dahlia riding on top of one of them with her little wings spread for balance. They climbed onto the bench, lined themselves up across the table, and before I could ask what any of this was, they began to dance. It was a clumsy, joyful, completely ridiculous routine. The sisters spun in circles. Dahlia stamped her feet and threw her wings up at every beat. Marcus came in a half step late on every single pose and looked absolutely crushed about it each time. And in the middle of it, Dahlia chirped out something that was clearly meant to be a war cry, A small, fierce sound aimed straight at Stella. "For our mother," she announced very seriously. "This is encouragement." I had not known they were planning anything. They must have practiced it somewhere I couldn't see. I looked at Stella, and the lid had come off the fire. Her eyes were bright and wet and steady all at once. "You did well," I told the dancers. Dahlia puffed up to twice her size. Stella picked up her bat and stood. The softness did not leave her face, but something underneath it had gone very hard and very ready. "Let's go," she said. The command post was a tree I had grown that morning, tall enough to see over the canopy to the spring where the last of the colony had been pushed. From up there, the battlefield looked almost orderly. Rows of shields, adventurers spread in a wide arc, wood at the front like a walking wall, and at the center of the enemy ground, the thing we had spent the whole campaign building toward. The flower general stood half again as tall as a tall man, a great knotted stalk of a monster, crowned with a single broad blossom. That blossom was the only soft thing on it, and it was the only part that mattered. Everything else was armor. The flower was the kill. The plan was simple to say and brutal to hold. Ring the stronghold, close the ring, give the general nowhere to sit and snipe from, and force it to walk forward into the open where Stella could reach it. The catch was the part no eye could solve. The general fired bullets you could not see. They left nothing in the air, no line, no glint, only a faint hiss, a half breath before they struck. Every veteran on that field had learned to respect that hiss the hard way. I could not fight that for her. What I could do, I did. I knelt on the deck, pressed both hands flat to the living wood, and let the magic go wide and slow. A soft green light unrolled across the whole line below, settling over every shield and every shoulder like a second skin. It would blunt what got through. It would buy seconds. The cost was that I could not move while I held it, so I knelt there, locked in place, and made myself into the one thing I had always been to these people. Not the spear, the wall behind the spear. Leah crouched beside me at the rail, her ridiculous fluffy hat pulled low, counting under her breath as the ring tightened. "It's moving," she said. Far below, the great stalk shuddered and began to walk towards Stella. Stella stood alone in the gap the adventurers had left for her, blindfolded. She had tied the black band over her eyes the way she always did now, the small wooden clackers fixed at her ankles so that every step she took threw a sound out into the world and brought a picture back. She did not need to see the general. She needed to hear it. And the moment it walked into the open, she could. The first bullet came with its little hiss. She turned her hip, slid into the swing the way I had taught her, and the bat met something in the empty air with a crack that rang off the trees. The invisible thing flared into sight for a half instant as it broke, then was gone. A clean return. The veterans behind the shields made a sound I felt more than heard. Then the general understood it had a problem, and the sky filled with hissing. 2 bullets, then 4. Then more than I could count from the deck. A steady drumming rhythm of unseen shots, and Stella answered everyone. Step, sound, swing. Step, sound, swing. She was reading a battlefield she could not see by the echoes coming off the trees and the dirt, and the general's own moving bulk, and she was batting death out of the air one beat at a time. I had built the method in my head and handed it to her in pieces. Watching her wear it like she had been born in it stopped my breath. The general kept walking. Closer meant faster. Closer meant heavier. The hisses came shorter and sharper, and for the first time her rhythm strained. A swing landing a hair late, then another. The stalk closed the distance with a patience that had nothing human in it. Then it saw her fully, and it bloomed red. A wide pulse of crimson light rolled out from the blossom, and every lesser archer still standing brightened with it. A buff, raw attack thrown across the whole field at once, and most of it aimed at the one elf standing in the open with a cloth over her eyes. The next bullet would come harder than anything yet, and it would come for her. Stella smiled. Light gathered around her, gold this time, not mine. It poured up out of her own body and wrapped her from the bat down to her boots. A brilliance I had glimpsed only in flickers before, and never like this. The whole line went quiet under it. She had perhaps 3 heartbeats inside that gold, and not one more, and she did not waste them. "There," she said, soft, like she was reading a page only she could see. The hiss began, high, wide, aimed at her arm. She had already moved. I won. The swing came up from the ground through her whole body, the slide and the hips and the shoulders all folding into one clean line, and the bat found the invisible bullet dead at its heart. For one frozen instant, the shot flared into the open, caught, turned, and went screaming back the way it had come, faster than the general had sent it. It struck the blossom dead center. The whole monster came apart like a cut stalk. The flower split, the great limbs folded, and the entire towering thing sank down into the dirt in a slow collapse of petals and pale fiber, the red light guttering out of it as it fell. No scream, no blood, just a giant weed laying itself down in the field it had crawled out of. For a breath, nobody moved. Then the forest came apart with noise. Across the whole arc, the lesser archers, leaderless now, broke and scattered and were cut down where they ran, and the adventurers were screaming her name loud enough to reach me on the deck. Stella pulled the band off her eyes. She stood there blinking in the gray light, the gold already fading from her shoulders, and I saw her go still for just a moment, her hand drifting to her chest, her head tilting like she was listening to something written down inside her in a hand she couldn't quite read. Then she found my window, and she lifted the bat, and she grinned. By the time I came down from the deck, the field was already a graveyard of weeds. Not one of ours had a wound worth a potion. A campaign that should have cost us a generation of fighters had cost us nothing, and the men knew exactly who to thank for it, because Stella could not take 3 steps without someone trying to lift her onto their shoulders. The 3 of us went to where the general had fallen to gather what it left behind. Roots worth a fortune, branches the wand makers would weep over, and tucked in the heart of the wreck, small as the tip of my finger, a single yellow stone that caught the light and held it like it had swallowed a lamp. Leah came over with her ledger and went quiet when she saw it. "A glowstone," she said. She turned it in her fingers, careful. "Condensed magic. They're beautiful and they're almost always useless. Feed one to most people and nothing happens at all. I've seen fortunes spent on them for nothing." I held out my hand and she gave it to me because she trusted me by now, even when I made no sense. She did not know what I knew. In another life, in a world that lived inside a game, I had learned the one rule that made a glowstone worth anything. The stone remembers what dropped it. A plant thing's gift wakes best in a plant thing's body. And I had a plant thing of my own. "Wood," I said. He lumbered over, all bark and patience, and bent his great head down to me. "Open up. Swallow this." He did it the way he did everything I asked, without a question, the stone vanishing into him like a pebble down a well. For a moment, nothing. Then a low rumble started somewhere in his chest, building into the wordless, delighted noise he only made when something genuinely surprised him. He turned, lifted one massive arm toward an empty stump across the clearing, and a seed shot out of his palm with a crack and split the wood clean through. He looked at his own hand. He looked at me. He fired another one, just to be sure the world was still letting him do it. My silent son could fight at a distance now. He spent the next while knocking the tops off every dead stump in reach, rumbling happily to himself. And I let him, because some victories you let a person enjoy. That night, the village did not sleep. They set the long tables out in the square and lit every lamp we owned, and the smell of roasting and baking rolled out over the dead land that was not dead anymore. The Cockatree sisters discovered an audience and would not be stopped, spinning their dance in the middle of the firelight until even Leah lost her dignity and joined them, hat and all, much to the delight of every adventurer there. Marcus carried plates with the gravity of a man performing surgery. Dahlia fell asleep mid-meal with her face in something sweet, and nobody had the heart to move her. I sat at the head of it and watched the whole impossible thing happen around me. A territory of one, my father had called it. A population of me. I looked down the table at the noise and the light, and the people the world had thrown away, and I thought he should have come to see his dead land now. Late in the evening, Leah found a seat beside me. The hat finally pushed back off her face, and she had gone serious in the way she only did when there was real money and real consequence on the table. She told me what she'd been turning over since the general fell. A win this size did not stay quiet. The guild would hear, the trade roads would carry it, and a place that could field a force like this and lose no one deserved to be more than a dot on a map. She wanted to charter a branch here, a real one with the guild's seal on it, and she wanted me to run it. "You want me to be a guildmaster?" I said. "I want you to be the chief of your own branch," she said, "of your own village that just felled an A-rank boss with no casualties." Yes, she tapped the table once. "Think about it, but not for too long." I told her I would. I did not tell her that something in my chest had pulled tight at the word chief, at the idea of a title given to me, freely, by people who had watched what I could do and decided it was worth something. It was a small thing. It was also the exact opposite of everything the Great Hall had ever offered me. Stella caught my sleeve as the feast wound down and drew me a little way out of the light, where the noise softened to a hum behind us. She was shy about it, which was its own strange thing to see in the woman who had just batted death out of the air all afternoon. When the general fell, she said slowly, something happened. To me, her hand came up to her chest, the same place it had drifted on the field. It felt the way it feels when you learn a skill. A word arrived. I can almost read it. It's mine now, I think, but I don't want to say it out loud yet. Not here. Not until I understand what it is. Then don't, I said. Tell me when you're ready. It'll keep. She nodded, relieved, and for a moment we just stood there at the edge of the warmth, the legend and the failure sun, both of us carrying things we weren't ready to show the world. I watched her a moment in the dim glow. You hit the impossible shot. You taught me how, she said, and there was no arguing with the way she said it, so I didn't try. I was not there to see it. I did not need to be. I knew that house the way you know a scar, and I knew exactly how the news would land in it. It came the way news always reached the great houses, through the guild's reports and the merchants' gossip and the long, quiet roads. A village on the dead territory in the far reaches. A colony of monsters that should have swallowed it whole. A boss the rank charts called a thing only a small army could face. And the village had not just survived it, the village had broken it clean and lost no one. And the name attached to that victory was a name they had spent years pretending not to own. For the first time, my father could not wave it away. I could see it without being there, the flat certainty in his face cracking, just at the edge, into something he would never name out loud, not pride. I did not flatter myself. My family did not do pride, not for me. What I had earned, after everything, was the one thing colder than contempt. I had earned their interest. I knew exactly how it went, because I had grown up watching them do it to better men than me. There would be no apology. There would be no letter, not yet, no rider sent to the dead land to say they had been wrong. Instead, there would be a long, careful silence in that hall while my father recalculated. The boy he had thrown out to die had grown something the realm was beginning to talk about. That changed nothing about what they thought of me. It changed only one thing, which was whether I might now be useful. They were not asking themselves if they had wronged me. They were asking themselves what I was worth. I should have been angry. Some part of me was, but mostly, that night, standing at the edge of a feast in a place I had grown out of nothing, I felt the thing I had wanted since the day the great hall doors shut behind me. They were looking. After everything, they were finally looking. I was not going to crawl back to be looked at. The acknowledgement I wanted would come on my terms, witnessed, or it would not come at all, and I could wait as long as that took. I had everything I needed right here, asleep with her face in the cake, dancing in the firelight, standing shy at the edge of the dark with a secret she trusted only to me. Let them recalculate, let them wonder, let them hear my name in their cold hall and not know what to do with it. Let them hear it. Winter had started to lean on the village. The mornings came in cold and slow now, and the first thing I did most days was stand at the window and watch frost burn off the fields I had grown out of dead dirt. The land my father called worthless was wearing white like it belonged there. Leah arrived before the kettle had finished, that ridiculous fluffy cockatrice hat pushed back on her head, a stack of documents under her arm. She did not waste my morning. She wanted to put an Adventurers Guild branch in Heelberry Village, and she wanted me to be its chief. I asked her why I would borrow the guild's name when I could simply build my own thing. I had grown the houses. I had grown the walls. I could grow an organization too. She slid a single handwritten page across the table instead of answering. Read that part first, she said, and tapped it once. It listed what a branch chief was, under the law. A branch chief could not be removed except by a vote at the supreme headquarters. A king could not detain him, could not summon him, could not lay a hand on his territory, not for any reason short of a crime caught in the open. The guild stood between the chief and every crown in the world. Then there was the last line, and the last line was the one she had really come to show me. In my family, the page said, only one man held a branch chief's seat, my father, not my eldest brother, not the brother they had handed the knights to, my father alone. I understood her then. This was not paperwork. This was a wall I could stand behind that my own blood could not climb over. The house that threw me out could send letters, send envoys, send armies of opinion, and none of it would matter because I would be holding a title even the Duke had to respect. Interesting proposal, I said. I let the corner of my mouth move. Let's hear the rest of it. It needed 4 officers to stand. I gave Stella the deputy's seat without asking twice. She had wanted, she told me once, some proof that she had put down roots here, and now she would have it in ink. Nathan I named document manager, and he froze with his ears flat and asked whether it was really all right. Someone like him, a merchant who fled from the north with nothing. I told him he had been my first follower, back when this was one collapsing house and a lot of cold. I'm not counting on someone like you. I said. I'm counting on you. His whiskers shook. He swore he would put his whole heart into it, and I believed him. I found Anna where I expected to find her, buried to the collarbone in the warm soil bath behind the tower, eyes half closed, looking like a woman who had decided the world could wait. The safety officer role needed someone with healer's knowledge, and there was no one in the village more overqualified for it than the pharmacist who had walked in early and never left. I told her what I was building and what seat I wanted her in. Even now, she cracked one eye at me, soil up to her chin. Then she laughed and said, of course, she loved this place, and if she could be useful, she would do it. Tessa came trotting past with a watering can almost as big as she was, the white rose on her head bobbing, and poured a stream of warm water over Anna's shoulders without being asked. The whole exchange took less time than a noble's morning bow. That was the village. People said yes here because they wanted to, not because they were afraid of the answer to no. 4 officers. The branch could stand. I walked back through my own streets, feeling something I did not have a clean word for, the weight of a thing becoming official, becoming named, becoming impossible to pretend away. I raised the guild hall myself, near the forest entrance where the timber and the roads met. A seed in the dirt, a hand laid flat, and the building came up the way the houses always did, slow and green and certain, folding itself into beams and a broad doorway while the catkin watched with their tails straight up. By evening, there was a chartered adventurers guild branch where there had been a clearing and a sign over the door with my name under the title. The village had become a place people came to on purpose. A mole scholar arrived from the academy to study the old underground passage. Traders I had never met asked for me by name. The boss we had felled in the autumn had put Heelberry on maps that used to leave the whole territory blank. I had wanted that. I had built toward it on purpose. What I had not quite braced for was the prickle that came with it, the sense, faint and constant now, of being looked at. A man who builds something undeniable should expect eyes. I just did not yet know whose. In the square, Wood had found a gentler use for his new skill. He sat in the middle of a pile of half-asleep catkin and fired soft tufts of cotton into the air, one after another, and the little ones chased them down shrieking with joy. Bruno bowed to me, grateful, and said the others would have him throwing fluff until spring. Wood turned his glowing eyes my way and rumbled that he liked it, the throwing, and I told him that was the whole point. I kept the rest to myself, the way I keep most things. There was knowledge in my hands the world had no name for, and I had learned long ago to spend it quietly. Let them see the garden. Let them never quite count how deep the roots went. The first time I saw her, she was swinging a bat in a cockatrice costume. Leah came pelting across the village to warn me, out of breath, hat askew, gasping that something enormous had happened. And then, when I asked what, she said it perfectly flat, a costume. An S-rank adventurer named Nora had arrived in the village, wearing a full cockatrice costume. There are only 8 S-rank adventurers in the whole world. Stella was one of them. And one of the other 7 was, apparently, standing in my second plaza in a fluffy pale gold suit with tinted glass eyes, taking practice swings at the new ball game like she had lived here for years. Dahlia was orbiting her feet, delighted, peppering the costume with questions about how it was made. The thing knelt down to her level and answered everyone with patience, admiring the stitching, fussing over the waist of the suit so it would not look bulky. My talking cockatrice and a legendary monster hunter, deep in a conversation about tailoring. It was charming. It was also wrong in the small way that matters. An S-rank does not wander into a frontier village by accident and start playing catch. Someone had sent her. The only question worth asking was who, and I already had a guess I did not like. When the sun finally dropped behind the trees, she stopped, knelt properly in front of me, and introduced herself. Then she reached up and pulled the cockatrice head loose and the rest of the suit with it. Underneath was a slim figure with short blue hair and pale red eyes, skin fair as fresh snow, the kind of beautiful that does not settle into man or woman and does not care to, a vampire. She tucked the whole costume into a button at her collar with a flick of storage magic, and it vanished. Dahlia stared, then announced with total certainty that she had molted and looked thrilled about it. I knew the face. It took me a moment, dragging it up from years back to a hall in my family's home where a strange blue-haired guest had passed through on the arm of one of my brothers. I had been no one worth a second glance back then, the son they kept at the edge of the room. She had not remembered me. I had not let myself forget anything. Vampires in the north had given up blood generations ago. Tomatoes were their bread now, and I grew the best tomatoes in the kingdom. That was a fine reason to come. It was not the reason. She had been sent by someone close enough to my family to know exactly where I had been buried, and she had walked into my gate wearing a costume so no one would think to ask why an S rank had come all this way to look at me. So the family was finally looking. Not with the Duke's cold silence anymore, with eyes, with a person. I smiled and invited her to dinner. Stella cooked. She had been turning out the dishes of her homeland lately. Fierce red things heavy with a dark chili paste, and she laid the table with tomatoes in every form a tomato can take. Fresh, roasted, simmered into soup, fried into something that made the whole room sweat. Nora ate like a woman who had crossed a country for exactly this. Marcus matched her plate for plate, complaining the entire time that it was too spicy, never once putting down his fork, draining cup after cup of water with the wounded dignity of a man who refuses to admit defeat to a vegetable. Dahlia, who could eat lightning if you salted it, declared everything delicious and asked for more. It was warm. It was the kind of table I had never once been given in my father's house. I let it be warm right up until the plates were clear, and Nora reached into her storage button and set an envelope down beside my hand. The seal on it was my family's. Inside was a banker's check for 100 gold coins and a letter in my brother Harold's careful, well-bred hand. I read it the way I read everything from that house, slowly, and without letting my face move. He wrote that he had been wrong, that the family had been wrong. He offered the money as a gift to mark my new standing, fussed over my health like a man who had suddenly remembered I could fall ill, and then, beneath all the courtesy, came to the point. He would support me. If I wanted it, if I would only reach for it, there was a path back, toward the family, toward the inheritance, toward the name they had stripped off me and tossed onto dead land. An apology, a purse, and an open door. Everything the young man who knelt in that ruin the day they cast him out had wanted, arriving years too late in someone else's handwriting. Nora watched me read it with the bored patience of a courier who knows exactly what she is carrying. She told me, plainly, that she had not come only to play postman. She had also come to turn down the guild's request to help survey the old passage and to be on her way. She was an artifact master, one of a handful in the world, and she did not stay anywhere long. I had no intention of letting her leave. A woman that skilled, sent by my family to take my measure. She was the most useful thing that had walked through my gate all year. So I did not let her go, and I did not chase her off. I made her an offer instead. My tomatoes spoiled in days. Her people in the north would pay anything to eat them fresh. If she stayed and helped me work out how to bottle and preserve them for the long road north, there was a fortune in it, and a study, and a home for as long as she wanted one. She tilted her head. The idea caught her. I could see it catch. Then she named her price, and it was not gold. When I next saw my brother Harold, she said, she wanted me to hit him, once, hard, on her behalf. She had spent years being handed his unpleasant errands, and this delivery was simply the latest. She would stay for the tomatoes. She wanted a punch in exchange. That much, I said. I can do any day of the week. Stella laughed behind her hand. The family had sent their own eyes into my house, and I had just hired them. The watcher was mine now. Later, when the house had gone quiet, Stella kept glancing at the letter where it sat on the table, and I decided she should hear the whole of it from me rather than guess. I told her about the Ashfords, one of the 5 great houses, a name that ruled more people than some kingdoms hold. I told her about the 3 older brothers, each born to a different mother, all of them grown and married and useful. And I told her about the youngest son, born to the wrong woman with the wrong magic, and about the morning his father looked at him with flat certainty and sent him to die on dead land. Come back, the man had said, when it is worth something. I don't want the inheritance, I said. I never did. This village is the most important thing I have. It's the only thing I want to protect. She reached over and took my hand and told me, simply, that the village was the most important thing to her too. I let that sit between us for a while. It was worth more than the check. Then I thought about my answer. I would write back because slamming the door was a thing you did when you were still angry enough to need the noise. And I was past that. I would thank Harold for the money. I would say nothing at all about the succession, about coming back, about the path he was so eager to hold open. Let the silence be mine for once. If the family was serious, truly serious, then they would not settle for a letter carried by a stranger. They would send someone. They would come to me, on my land, under my title, and stand in front of what I had built and ask. That was the shape of the thing I wanted, and I finally let myself name it. I would not crawl home. I would not slip my neck into the leash they were dangling and call it forgiveness. But I would not pretend I felt nothing either. I wanted to be sought. I wanted them to come looking, hats in hand, and find me already a lord. And only then would I decide whether the men who threw me away had earned the right to call me family again. The debt was open now. For the first time in my life, the house that discarded me had said the words out loud. Sorry, come back. We were wrong. It was not enough, not nearly, but it was a beginning and I could wait. I had grown a whole world out of waiting. We had spent a week getting ready, and on the morning we went down, I gave the kind of short speech a man gives when he is more worried than he wants to show. Be careful, watch your footing. Nobody gets hurt today. Then I pressed my hand to the wall and grew a soft moss that drank in light and gave it back green, enough to see by for a few hours, and we stepped into the dark under my own land. The passage was stone, wide enough for 3 of us shoulder to shoulder, and just tall enough that Wood could walk it if he promised not to jump. He promised loudly, several times. It was Stella who went first. She always did. She had her bat across her shoulder, the one she had named long ago, and she walked toward the thing waiting in the dark the way other people walk toward a friend. The thing was a lion, not a real one, a milky white statue, a great carved head set on a pedestal, the sort of decoration a rich man puts at his gate. Then its eyes lit, and it spat a ball of purple lightning straight down the corridor at her. I had time to think one word. Her bat was already moving. She hit it clean. The crack of it filled the whole passage, and the ball went back the way it came and struck the lion in its open mouth, and the light inside it died like a snuffed candle. Behind me, Nora made a small choked sound inside her costume. Even among the 8 of us who carry the highest rank, she said, that is not a thing people do. Stella only walked up and tapped the dead stone with one knuckle. The circuits inside are broken, she reported. No danger now. Then, almost to herself, a little disappointed. It was more fragile than I thought. Deeper down, Wood asked to take the front, and Stella let him. He was proud of it. When the next lion lit up and threw its lightning, he simply stood in it, shook himself, and announced that it tingled. Only a little, less than his mother's cooking. Then he raised one wooden arm and fired. Soft white tufts, his seed bullet, the gentle range trick he had been growing into. The fluff went straight down the lion's throat. When the statue tried to fire again, its own lightning caught in the cotton and turned on itself, and the carved head sparked once and went still. Isabel scrambled up to study the dead stone, muttering in that mole tribe way she has, every other word ending in a small dug-up sound. She told us what the lions were made of: thunder ore and marble, fused into one stone that could hold and pour out magic. Such a fusion was rare, she said, stupidly rare. The kind of thing a kingdom could barely manage, let alone whoever had set these here like garden ornaments and walked away. I ran my thumb over the seam in the stone and felt the old wrongness of it. Nobody in this age made things like this. I filed the thought and said nothing. Then the passage opened, and the last lion was not on a pedestal. It stood. It had a body, armored, knightly, a lion's head crowning a frame built to move, and when it saw us, it turned its whole self to face us, smooth and deliberate. It threw its lightning, and the ball split in the air into 2. Stella took one out of the sky with a swing that should not have been possible. The other she could not reach, and it was Wood who lunged across her and ate the second bolt with his own shoulder. He grunted. He was fine. He was always fine. But the thing reset itself and squared up to throw again, and there was no clean line left for any of us. We pull back, Stella said. Not a question. She had learned that from me. When a fight has no shape yet, you leave and you come back with one. Report to Lord Adrian. I was already up the passage. The shape was forming in my head before we reached the light. We ate lunch in the sun, and that was where the past walked up and sat down with us. Lara is one of the underground dryads, Tessa's sister, a small green thing with a pale flower where hair should be, and a memory that runs longer than any kingdom's. She looked at the dead lion we had hauled up into the daylight, and her face went soft and far away, and she said she had seen one before, a long time ago, cold seasons past counting. She told it the way dryads tell things, gentle and out of order. A queen of her own kind had sent her west to grow the forest, and in this land, back then, there had lived a great cockatrice and a mage, a princess, pale-skinned, with long silver hair, and the 2 of them had made the lions, and then they had gone east and not come back. I kept my face very still. Pale skin, silver hair. I have a demon living in my house with pale skin and long silver hair. Nora had a word for what we were standing on. The devil's craft, she called it. Old work, made by hands that were not human and not of this world, finer than anything an honest smith could manage. She said it the way you say the name of a sickness. I looked at the dead stone lion lying in my grass, made by something pale and silver-haired, who went east and never came home, and I told Lara, quietly, that I would like to hear more about the old days sometime. She said, of course. She had nowhere to be. I did not say the rest of it out loud, that the floor under my comfortable little world might be older and darker than I had let myself believe. Home is the cure for that kind of thinking, and home was waiting. Dahlia had spent the day dragging cotton out of the catkin folk who loved to chase the soft tufts wood fires for them, and she had built a mountain of it in the middle of the floor. Curled in the top of the pile, fast asleep on his back, was a small silver puppy. That was Marcus. He had learned a new trick, folding all of himself down into something fluffy and harmless, paws in the air, snoring. Dahlia patted his round belly in her sleep and would not be parted from him for anything, the demon who terrified no one. I had no idea yet how much that would matter. I sat with the puppy warm against my leg and worked the problem of the lion knight in my head. It threw two. You could not stop two with one bat. I had run that road and hit the wall at the end of it. A bigger bat broke the shape of the game, but the game I had carried out of a life I no longer talk about had a rule I had forgotten to check, and the rule said nothing at all, about how many bats a single player could hold. Stella, she looked up from the fire. Can you swing with one arm? Yes, 2 bats, one in each hand, both at once. She was quiet a moment, the way she gets when she is already swinging in her head. I think I can, she said. I will need to get used to it. So I made her a second one, pale ashwood, the kind that bends instead of breaking, thinner and a little longer than the first. I grew it out of the floor while she watched, and when I set it in her left hand, she held it like it was made of glass and named it on the spot, some grand hero's sword name to stand beside the one her old bat already carried. 2 named weapons for a game of catch. I did not laugh. I had learned not to. She practiced in the plaza for days, and Nora threw for her. It was a strange thing to watch. One of the 8 highest-ranked adventurers alive, stuffed into a fluffy yellow costume, trying to fling 2 balls at once to play the part of a lightning gun. Nora could not do it cleanly, complained the whole time, and threw with both hands like a woman emptying a bucket. It was enough. Stella needed something to read, and she read everything, both bats up, hips around. 2 cracks so close together they were nearly one sound, both balls dead in the dirt. By the end of the week, she was hitting paired throws out of the air without thinking, both hands moving like one mind ran them. She wanted to keep going past dark. She always wanted to keep going. We went back down for the night. It stood when it saw us, turned and threw, and the ball split into 2 as before, 2 purple lights coming for the one small woman in front of it. Both her arms came up. She took the first on the right and the second on the left, 2 clean strikes a hair apart, and she put them both back where they came from, both straight down the lion's open throat. The thing tried to swallow its own lightning and could not. Its head lit from the inside, white and stuttering, and then every glow in it went out at once, and it stopped being anything but a heavy statue standing in the dark, bloodless. It had never had blood to give. It was only stone and old wrong magic, and now it was quiet. The way past it lay open, corridor running on into the dark toward the labyrinth city, the route nobody had been able to clear before. We had it now. My people had it, and carved into the lintel above the dead knight, where the moss light just reached, was a mark I did not know in a hand that did not belong to this world. Strength proven, mystery deeper. I stood there a long moment, proud and uneasy in the same breath, and then I took us home. The cold thing reached me 3 mornings later, and it came wearing my own family's face. Nathan brought the building plans for the new guild hall, 2 floors, a kitchen, a corner to sell the village's little wonders to travelers. He spread them out, and then he glanced at the door, and then he lowered his voice, the way a man does when the news is heavier than the paper under it. There was a rumor out of the capital, he said. The order my brother Bennett had been raised to command now had a name attached to it, the Black Dragon Knights. I had to sit with the name a moment. Bennett I remembered as the warm one, the big one, the brother who used to spar with me in the training yard and go easy, and who never once told our father I had any worth. That was almost the gentlest thing anyone in that house ever did for me, but it was the order that turned my stomach cold. The Black Dragon Knights were built around the memory of one man, their founder, a celebrated hero, a dragon slayer whose name still fills a stage. And the thing the histories are too proud to say plainly, the thing performed now only as a comedy, is that this great founder was once humiliated in single combat, beaten to nothing, by a golden-haired hero who sleeps under my roof and names her bats after legends. I sat in the sawdust of my own guild hall and did the arithmetic. The brother who never thought less of me, given a sword and a banner, and an order whose entire reason to exist is a grudge against the woman I have built my home around. An order that drills every day on the shame of the day she shamed them. They would not leave that alone. Men like that never do. Sooner or later, they would come looking for her, and the road they took would run straight to my gate, under my father's name. I had spent a year wanting my family to come find me. I had pictured a letter. I had pictured an envoy at my gate with his hat in his hands. I had even pictured, in my worst and best moments, the old man himself standing on my dead land and being made to call it alive. I had never once pictured them coming with horses and steel and a grievance older than any of us, riding to put their boots on the neck of the one person who had made this place a home. The letter from Harold was still folded in a drawer upstairs. Sorry, come back. We were wrong. And here came the next word from the same house, in the same breath almost, and it was not sorry at all. It was a banner. I told Nathan to keep it quiet and to keep the hall going and not to look so frightened. Inside, every quiet thing in me had gone very still and started counting days. I brought Marcus down to the dead lions that evening. I told myself it was to ask what a demon made of the devil's craft. The truth is, I wanted to watch his face. He ambled up to the statue in his lazy human shape, complaining about being hungry, reaching out to poke the carved mouth the way a man pokes a strange dog. His hand stopped a finger from the stone. Everything about him changed without moving. The complaint died in his throat. His eyes, pale and harmless a breath before, kindled into a deep burning red, and the air around him went heavy and thin at once, the way the air goes before lightning. And for just that moment, the silly, comfortable creature I let sleep by my fire was not silly, and not comfortable, and not small. He was old. He was enormous. Something looked out of him at the carved lion and knew it, knew the hand that made it, knew a world that had ended long before this one began. His lips moved around a few words in no language I owned, low and certain, like a king greeting a thing he had buried himself. Then it passed. He blinked. The red guttered back to pale. His shoulders came down, and he turned to me with that empty, cheerful grin and asked if dinner was ready. And he had no idea, none, that for one heartbeat, he had filled the whole clearing. I said dinner was almost ready. I kept my voice flat and easy. I walked him home with my hand light on his back and my mind running cold and fast underneath. A night order with my brother at its head was riding toward my home to settle an old score with the woman I loved. And the demon I had taken in to be safe was, somewhere under all that fur and appetite, a door to something far larger and far older than any of it. Every thread I had was pulled tight at once. None of them had snapped yet. I stood in my own doorway that night, counting them, and waited for the first one to break. We came up out of the tunnel into the late afternoon, Stella and I, the glow of the underground moss still swimming behind my eyes. The light up top was honest sunlight, gold and going long across the grass, and the houses I had grown from seed stood there with their leaves turning. I had raised this place out of dead dirt with my own two hands, and I never quite stopped being surprised that it had become somewhere a person could come home to. Then I saw the banner at the gate, and the warmth went out of the day. A black dragon on a black field, and under the dragon a knight, trampled and somehow still standing. I knew that emblem, the way you know a scar, the Black Dragon Knights, one of the 7 great orders of the kingdom, and the last thing on this earth I had expected to find waiting in the place my father sent me to rot. 5 riders sat their horses in full black plate. One held the banner, and walking them in, with a plush wing raised in a lazy little wave, came a fat golden cockatrice that was not a cockatrice at all. "Found these on the road," Nora said from inside the costume. "They were asking the way to Heelberry Village, so I brought them home." She said it light, the way she said everything, but under the padded head, her voice dropped for half a breath, just for me. The order, she murmured, had likely come for an old debt. A founder of theirs, long ago, had been broken by a hero, and the hero now lived here. I felt Stella go still at my shoulder. There was a 6th rider I hadn't counted, set a little apart, and he was the only one not in black. His plate was deep red, lacquered like something out of a story, and an emerald shield hung at his back, green as river ice. Only the high officers of the order, I would learn, were allowed their own colors. Everyone else wore the dragon's black. He swung down from the saddle, and he took off his helm. I had spent a year not thinking about the great hall where my father stood over me, flat-voiced, and told me not to come back until this dead land was worth something. I had buried that look of his so deep, I almost believed it was gone. It came up out of the ground all at once, looking at the face under that red helm, because the face had the same jaw, the same straight nose, the same green in the eyes that I saw in my own reflection. It was my brother, Bennett. He looked at me, and then he looked past me, at the trees with houses inside them, at the grass on dead land, and something moved across his rough, big-boned face that I didn't have a name for yet. He addressed me, not by my name, He called me the lord of this place, asked whether the lord was keeping well, and then, with the faintest catch, said that I looked well, or he supposed that he should say my lord. The words landed strange in his mouth. He was the family's sword, made commander of an elite order, a man the kingdom bowed to, and he was bowing his words to me. He asked plainly to lodge his men a night. They were on an errand and only passing through. He reached for the purse at his belt to pay for the trouble. "Keep it," I said. "I don't take coin from a brother." For a moment, he didn't move at all. Stella had tried, very quietly, to make herself smaller and drift toward the back of the group while the brothers talked. It almost worked. It was the banner bearer who saw her first. Golden hair, pointed ears, a hero's face that the order had grown up cursing. One of the Black Knights said her name like a struck match, and then they were all off their horses, and the air changed. I had felt killing intent before. It is not a sound and not a smell, just a pressure that says some living thing has decided to end another. 5 trained men pushed it at the woman standing next to me, the woman who raised our daughter and slept under my roof, and every easy thing I had felt about my brother's visit turned to iron in my chest. They demanded it out loud now, all pretense of an errand gone. The hour of their revenge had come, they said. For the honor of their founder, the man Stella once put in the dirt, they would have satisfaction. Stella's hand found the bat at her hip. She didn't want this. I could see it in the line of her mouth. She had never once enjoyed hurting people, and these were only proud men chasing a dead grudge. But she would stand in front of my home if I asked her to, and she would win. And I did not want her to have to. I was 3 breaths from saying something I could not take back. That was when Tessa and Lara came around the corner of the tower, leading the entire underground flock of cockatrices out for their evening walk. I want to be fair about what happened next, because it is one of the funniest things I have ever watched. The fearsome Black Dragon Knights, an order before whom whole towns went quiet, took one look at a column of fluffy, waddling, harmless birds and made a sound I can only describe as a strangled scream. 2 of them fell flat on their backs and lay perfectly still with their eyes shut. One tried to climb back onto a horse that wanted nothing to do with him. The killing intent that had been crushing the air a second before evaporated like spit on a hot stone. The cockatrices, who are immune to magic and to swords and to the dignity of armored men, looked at the fallen knights with mild interest and waddled over to check on them. The knights, lying there, began to sweat. Stella blinked. Her hand came off the bat. "They are afraid of the cockatrices," she said, in a tone of pure wonder. "They are terrified of the cockatrices," I agreed. Bennett did not scream. I will give him that. He stood with his arms folded and his helm under his arm and watched his elite order come apart over a flock of birds. And he let out a slow breath through his nose like a man who had expected exactly this and was tired of being right. He told his men, in a voice he kept very even, to compose themselves. They were guests in the Lord's village, he reminded them, and there would be no rudeness. There would be no rudeness. He kept saying it. I think he was as much warning them as me. The birds wandered off eventually, herded along by the dryads, and the knights peeled themselves off the ground one by one with whatever shreds of pride they could gather. The captain of them, a slab of a man built like a doorframe, got to his feet and made his challenge again, because of course he did. "A duel," he said, "blade to blade, the hero against the order, to wash out the old shame." He spoke to Stella, but his eyes kept flicking past me, the way men's eyes do when they've decided you don't matter. I let him finish. Then I told him no blood would be spilled on my ground. I said it once, simply, and I meant every word of it. Not because I was afraid of what a duel would do to them. Stella would have ended any one of them inside 10 seconds, and probably all 5 inside 20. I refused because a corpse is a grievance, and a grievance is a thread, and a thread leads all the way back to a great hall, and a man who would love nothing more than a reason to call me a murderer of the kingdom's finest. If they wanted to test themselves against my home, fine. They would do it on my terms. A contest, I told them. No blades, no killing. Endurance, theirs against ours, until one side could not stand. They would face the village across a field, and they would learn exactly what the dead land had grown while they weren't looking. And when it was over, no one, I made sure to say this part slowly, looking at the captain and not at my brother, no one would lay a hand on a single person who lived under my roof. It would end my way, or it would not end at all. The captain bristled. "A knight," he started to say, "does not refuse a challenge of strength. Good, I said. Then you won't refuse mine. That was the moment Dahlia decided to arrive. She came around the corner riding on Marcus, who was in his small silver puppy shape and trotting like he owned the place. And she chirped up at all of us to ask brightly whether these were guests and what we were all doing standing around in the dark. A talking cockatrice to men who had just learned that ordinary cockatrices were the stuff of their nightmares. A cockatrice that opened its beak and spoke pleasant words in a bright, piping lilt was apparently one horror too many. Two of the knights lay straight back down on the ground and shut their eyes, very fast, and pretended with great commitment to be asleep. Are those the sleepy ones, Pio? Dahlia asked, peering down at them. They fall asleep so quick. That is a sign of good health, Pio. I will bring them cotton later so they sleep warm. I picked her up off the puppy and held her, and I felt the last of the iron go out of my chest. Bennett was watching her and watching me hold her, and the unnamed thing crossed his face again, deeper this time. He said nothing. He only agreed in his even voice that the contest sounded fair and that his men would meet us in the morning. We went home. On the way, I told Stella what the game would be, and she smiled like the sun coming up. Nora took the knights to one of the empty lodging houses and, somewhere out of my hearing, told them the truth they hadn't asked for. She told me about it later, dry as ever. She had dropped the costume, let them feel the weight of who she actually was, watched them go pale and kneel, and then asked them, plainly, if they truly meant to stand in front of Stella. Their odds of surviving 10 seconds of her, she'd said, were worse than 1 in 100. It would be a fine experience, as long as Stella held back enough not to kill them. They had decided to do it anyway. Pride is a kind of deafness. At home, I made the bats, 5 plain lengths of grown wood, which cost me almost nothing. Then I sat down on the cotton and found, to my own surprise, that I was tired. Not in the body, somewhere further in. Dahlia noticed before I did. She told me I looked tired, Pio, and that I should nap, and she pushed a wad of cotton at me with one wing. Marcus, curled into a silver comma at my side, cracked one eye and told me not to chew on a thing until it had teeth, then fell asleep between one word and the next, the way only he can. I lay there and let myself think the thought I'd been holding off all afternoon. My brother had come to my gate, not my father. Not a letter, not an apology, not the acknowledgement I had told myself, that first cold night in the ruin, that I would one day wring out of the people who threw me away. Bennett had come because an order he commanded had a grudge to settle, and the village had simply happened to be in the path of it. He called me my lord because protocol made him. Back in the great house, the eldest pushed papers, the second carried a sword, the third painted, and the fourth had been a thing to get rid of. Nobody from that house had ever once sought me out for myself. I had wanted them to come to me. I had wanted it witnessed, and here was a piece of it, arrived sideways, on horseback, in armor, wearing my brother's face. And it was not the shape I had asked for. The want was still there, unfed. Sought, but not for me. Seen, but not by the one whose seeing I was owed. Stella settled down beside me. She didn't say anything clever. She just rested her hand against my arm, lightly, the way she did when she thought I was already asleep. And after a while, I was. The morning came clear and warm and windless, the kind of autumn day that feels borrowed. Half the village turned out for it. Nathan met me at the edge of the field, tail high, and explained in a delighted rush that the knights had agreed to spectators, that he'd told them a victory with no witnesses was barely a victory at all, and they had grandly given their leave for us to watch as much as we liked. He didn't know what he'd done, saying that. Witnesses were the whole point. I had just never expected the men I was beating to invite them for me. They set up a commentary booth, Anna and Nora, of all people, with a board between them. Cockatrices lay about on spread cloth like fat cushions for people to lean on. Someone was already selling grass dumplings. The Black Dragon Knights, an order whose entire creed was 3 words, unbending, enduring, unyielding, had stripped down to light gear and stood across the field, looking like men who had come to a funeral and found a fair. The rules were simple, the way the best things are. We would throw, they would hit, then they would throw and we would hit, turn and turn about. And there would be no points and no innings and no end except the one that mattered. It went until a side could not stand. Last on their feet won. Stella took the field with a bat in each hand. Durandal and Fragarac and Wood lumbered out beside her, and across from them the captain set his jaw and told his men that the Lord had chosen the manner of this, and a knight does not flinch from a swung weapon, and they would accept it. Brave words. I almost felt for them. Then it began, and Stella started to take them apart. She didn't swing hard. That was the cruelty of it, the kind without a single drop of blood in it. She swung easy, loose, mixing her speeds, sending the ball back at angles that made grown men lunge and scramble and reset and lunge again. When it was her turn to receive, she stood relaxed and returned everything, fast pitch and slow, never tiring, never rushed, a hero playing a children's game at a stroll, and wood pitched. This is the part I had been waiting on. Months ago, the gentle giant I grew from a seed learned to fold a seed and a breath of magic into a single shot and fire it. His seed bullet, soft as cotton and quick as a loosed arrow. He had used it on stone golems. Now he stood on a sunny field and threw it underhand at armored men, and every bullet came in faster than the last, humming, impossible to read, and the knights swung at empty air and felt the soft white burst pat them on the breastplate a half second after they'd missed. "Another clean one from the big fellow," Anna announced from the booth, gleeful. "And there is Stella's nothing much swing again, folks. I do not know how she does it. I do not think she knows either." The first knight went down inside the hour, not struck down, just down, on his hands and knees in the grass, chest heaving, a man who had given everything he had to a game and had nothing left to give. The sun climbed to the top of the sky and stayed there, and the proud order of the Black Dragon came apart one man at a time on the grass of a village that did not exist a year ago. The second knight folded near midday, sliding down onto his side, eyes rolling, his bat dropping from fingers that wouldn't close anymore. A third sat down hard and simply stopped, head hanging, breath sawing in and out. They had trained their whole lives for endurance. They wore the word on their banner, and they were learning in front of everyone they had wanted to impress that the thing they had bragged about was a thing my home did better in its sleep. Only the captain was left. I have to credit him. He stood when no part of him should have been standing. His legs shook, sweat ran off him in sheets, and his great chest worked like a bellows. And still, he hauled the bat up and faced Stella across the trampled grass, because somewhere behind his eyes was a dead founder he could not bear to face having quit. He shouted at himself to hold. He shouted that he could not give up. What would he say to the founder? And Stella, who is the kindest person I know and does not always understand when kindness wounds, looked at him almost sadly and told him the truth he had built his whole order against. "Your founder," she said. "When I knocked him down, 3 good hits it took. He got back up and walked away laughing. He took it better than this." She lowered her bats a little. "It is all right to stop. No one here thinks less of you." The captain made a sound that was half a roar and half a sob, and threw one more pitch, a weak, looping, exhausted thing, and Stella stepped in and met it cleanly and sent it singing out over the field, and that was all he had. He dropped to one knee, the bat went into the dirt, and he leaned on it like an old man leans on a cane. And for a long moment, the whole plaza was silent except for his breathing. Then he said it. "A knight's duty," he said, "was also to know defeat." And he pitched forward into the grass and did not get up. I stood there and let it land on me. This was the order my family worshipped. These were the men the kingdom feared, the sword the great houses pointed at their enemies, the kind of strength my father had wanted from me and looked at me with contempt for lacking. And every last one of them was lying in the dirt of my dead land, beaten without a wound, by a woman the world threw away, and a tree I grew, and a game I remembered from a life I no longer talk about. Useless magic, they had told me. I almost wanted them to come see it. They had come. They were face down in it. Anna was already running onto the field with a potion, fussing over the fallen captain, tipping it past his lips, and within a few breaths, the color came back into his face, and his eyes opened, clear. The bone-deep exhaustion simply wiped away. He looked up at the small red-headed woman who had healed him in 3 seconds with something from a vial, and then he looked at the cottage houses grown from trees, and the talking bird, and the giant made of wood, and the hero standing over him without a mark on her, and I watched the last of his order's certainty quietly die. They had ridden in to humble us. They were going to ride out as men who owed us their afternoon and their pride, and, in the captain's case, his consciousness. Guests now, dependent on the hospitality of the brother my family threw in the trash. Dahlia waddled over with a wad of cotton clutched in both wings and tucked it carefully under the captain's head, telling him, P.O., that he had fallen asleep again and ought to sleep warm. He let her. A grown knight of the Black Dragon, lying in the grass with a cockatrice arranging his pillow, and not 1 ounce of fight left in him to object. It turned into a party, the way the best days in this village always do. Nathan dug into the stores. The cockatrices got their dumplings. The knights recovered, sheepish, no longer able to remember exactly why they had ridden in so angry, ended up sitting shoulder to shoulder with the people they'd come to fight, eating off the same boards. Bennett came to me while the fires were being lit. He set a leather purse down in my hand, and it was heavy, the kind of heavy that is meant to say something. He'd watched the hero's strength with his own eyes, he said, and this was thanks for the trouble. He said it like thanks. We both knew part of it was the other thing, coined to keep a quiet event quiet, to make sure word of an order humbled by a village stayed out of the wrong ears. I weighed it in my palm. Then I called Nathan over and asked if we had enough in the stores to feed everyone properly tonight. We did. So I spent my brother's hush money, every coin of it, on a feast in the open where the whole village could see, and I made sure the knights ate the best of it. If the visit was meant to be invisible, I would make it the loudest afternoon of the season. Let them carry that home. Bennett watched me do it. He didn't stop me. That unnamed thing was all over his face now, and I was beginning to understand what it was. It was a man looking at someone he had helped to discard, and discovering that the someone had built, out of nothing, on cursed ground, the one thing their whole great house had never managed to be, a home that people did not want to leave. He didn't say any of that. My brother was never a man for saying things straight. He only stood beside me at the edge of the firelight for a while, quiet, and then he asked, low, if the two of us might find somewhere out of sight to talk. Just us, away from the noise. There was a weight under the words he wasn't putting into them. Across the fire, Stella laughed at something Dahlia said, and the light moved over the houses I'd grown, and the men who'd come to break us slept off their dumplings in the grass. A year ago, I had knelt alone in a dead ruin and sworn that one day the people who threw me away would have to look at me and know exactly what they had done. I wasn't there yet. The one whose look I was owed still sat silent in a hall far to the south, and no purse of gold and no broken order settled that account. But my brother was standing in my home in the dark, asking for a word he didn't have the courage to say in the light. All right, I told him, let's talk, and I led him away from the fire. He had asked for a private word, away from the fire. I had thought it would be talk. It was not talk. When the feast burned down to embers the night before, my brother had not said the thing he came to say. He led me up onto the flat roof of the guild hall instead, where the village could not watch, and he stood there a long while with his back to me, looking out over rooftops that had been dead dirt a year ago. Then he turned, and there was a practice sword in each of his hands, and he held one of them out to me. So this was the word he could not say with his mouth. I understood it. There are men who can only ask a question with their bodies, and my brother was one of them. He needed to measure me himself. He needed his own two hands to tell him the truth, because no rumor and no broken order ever would. I took the sword. The sun was barely up when we began, just a thin gray line over the eastern wall. The air so cold it bit the inside of my chest. One of his men had followed us up the stairs and stood by the door with his arms crossed, a slab of a knight with a face like he had never once been surprised in his life. He was about to be. My brother came at me first. He was big, bigger than any of us, the only one of the four sons who had built his body the way other men build fortunes, and he moved like the commander he was, no waste in it, every step a thing he had paid for in 1,000 mornings on a real training ground. I had watched men like him all my life and been told I would never be one of them. Magic was a noble's worth, they said. The sword was second, and I had no magic worth the word, so I had nothing at all. But there was another life under this one, a life I do not talk about, where I had a body that was only numbers and time was the one thing I had no shortage of. I had swung a blade 10,000 times in a world that no longer existed. My hands remembered it, even when I told them to forget. I let him press me at first. I wanted to feel the shape of him, the way you feel the grain of wood before you cut it. He was strong. He was fast for his size. He was, I thought, genuinely one of the finest swordsmen the family had ever produced, and the family had produced a great many. Then I stopped letting him. It is hard to describe the moment a fight turns, because to the man losing it, there is no moment. There is only the slow understanding that the floor has tilted and he is the one sliding. I slipped inside his guard and tapped the flat of my sword against his ribs. Once, light as a knock on a door. He stepped back, reset, came again harder. I took the heat out of him the way you take heat out of a kettle, a little at a time, and on the next pass I touched his shoulder, and the pass after that his wrist, and the pass after that I had the dull edge of the practice blade resting against the side of his neck while he stood there breathing like a bellows. He laughed. I want to be careful here because I had braced for almost anything except that. He stepped back and dropped his point and laughed, not the bitter sound a proud man makes when he has lost, but something loose and astonished. The laugh of a man who has finally been told the answer to a question that kept him up at night. The knight by the door made a noise of pure disbelief and asked his commander, in a voice that cracked, whether he had let his guard down, whether this had been some courtesy. My brother only shook his head. We went again, because he wanted to be sure, and because I owed him the certainty. 5 times we crossed the roof in the cold dawn. 5 times the practice sword found him before his ever found me, and by the 5th, he was not even trying to win. He was simply watching, the way a man watches a thing he refuses to look away from, because looking away would be a kind of lie. He lowered his sword for the last time, and let the point rest on the stone. His chest heaved. The light had come up gold over the wall by then, and it fell across his face, and the unnamed thing I had been tracking on that face since the day he rode through my gate finally had a name. It was not anger. It had never been anger. It was a man looking at his little brother and understanding, far too late, exactly what the family had thrown into the dirt. The knight had gone back down the stairs. I think my brother sent him with a look. Whatever was coming, he did not want it witnessed, and for once in this whole arc, I did not need witnesses either. The witnessing was done. The order lay scattered and humbled in my village below. The realm would say what the realm would say. What happened next on that roof was not for the realm. It was for the two of us, and the cold morning, and the years between. He set the practice swords down against the parapet, both of them, side by side, and he stood with his back very straight, the way our father's sons were taught to stand. And then he bent that straight back, and he bowed to me. I have to tell you what that meant, and to tell you, I have to take you back. There is a great hall I have not let myself think about in a long time. Cold stone, a long table, a high seat. I stood at the foot of it in clothes that did not fit because no one had bothered to have them fitted, and a man with my eyes and none of my blood's warmth looked down the length of that table and told me, flat as a ledger, to get out. Don't come back, he said, until that dead land is worth something. My brothers stood along the walls, the eldest, who would be a lord, the second, who would be a sword, the third, who would be an artist, and me, the fourth, the mistake, the son of the wrong mother, being measured against a wasteland and found cheaper than the wasteland. Not one of them spoke for me. Not one of them looked at me. I walked out of that hall carrying nothing, and the thing I carried out was not grief. It was that look, the certainty in it, the total, casual certainty that I was nothing. That look is the thing I built a village to answer. That is the truth of it, the truth under all the fruit and the houses I grew from seeds, and the family I gathered out of the world's leftovers. Every wall I raised at that look. Every morning I knelt in the dirt and made something live. I was saying back across all those miles, you were wrong, you were wrong, you were wrong. And now the family's strongest son was bowing to me on a rooftop in the dawn, and he was apologizing. He did not perform it. He was not a man with words to spare, and he spent the few he had carefully. He told me he had always lost to me. He said it plainly, that years ago, in a quiet practice yard where no one was keeping score, he had crossed swords with me and lost, and had told no one, and had carried it ever since. He said he had known, even then, with his hands, if not his head, that there was something in me the family had decided not to see, and he said he was sorry for the cold, for the way our mother's name had been made into a wall around me, for the exile, for every year he had stood along a wall and said nothing, while the youngest of them was treated as less than the dogs in the kennel. I let the words land. I made myself let them land because I had wanted them for so long that I was almost afraid of them, afraid the wanting was bigger than the having, the way a starving man can be afraid of a full table. But it was not bigger. It was exactly the size of the wound, and it fit into the wound like a key into a lock I had stopped believing would ever open. Something in my chest that had been clenched since the morning he sent me away let go. I did not let him see all of it. I am not made that way, and I do not think he needed to see all of it, but I felt it go, this fist that had been closed around my heart for a year, and the morning got very bright and very quiet, and the cold did not feel like cold anymore. Raise your head, big brother, I said. He raised it. His eyes were wet, which I had not expected from a man built like a siege engine, and he did not bother to hide it, which I respected more than anything else he had done. We stood there in the gold light, 2 of the Duke's sons on land the Duke had called dead, and for the first time in our 2 lives, we were simply brothers. I did not tell him it was all right. It was not all right. Some things do not become all right. They only become finished. But I told him I heard him. I told him that was enough. And I meant it more than I have ever meant anything I said to that family. The news of it did not wait wait for me to decide what to do with it. That is the thing about a thing done in front of witnesses, and the days before had been nothing but witnesses. An elite order, the realm's pride, broken bloodless in a sporting contest on the land everyone had written off. The hero who had felled their founder living in my house and calling it home. And now the family's own knight commander, my brother, beaten 5 times running by the son they exiled, and bowing for it. You cannot put that back in the bottle. By the time my brother and I came down off the stair, it had already started to travel, through his own men, who could not unsee it, through Nora, who had carried so much of the family's gaze to my gate already, through the guild, which writes everything down. It would go where such things go. It would go home. My brother told me, on the balcony, what would happen there. He did not pretend otherwise, and I respected him for that too. He said the house could not hold its old story anymore. A man they had called worthless had built a power the realm now had to name, and had brought their finest order to its knees without spilling a drop. And the family that had thrown him away could keep calling him worthless, or it could claim him. It could not do both. Pride is a luxury, and the house had just been handed a bill it could not refuse to pay. He said our father would acknowledge me, not because the cold in the man had thawed. I did not flatter myself that far, and neither did my brother, but because the house's standing now depended on the very son it had discarded, and a duke protects the house before he protects his pride. The name would be restored. The 4th son, struck from everything, would be a son again in the ledger and in the realm's eyes, whether the man at the head of the table liked the taste of it or not. I waited to feel the thing I had spent a year thinking I would feel when this moment came. It came, but it was a quieter thing than the man who walked out of that great hall had imagined. There was no fire in it. There was something better than fire. There was the deep, settled weight of a debt paid in full, the cold certainty in my father's eyes, the one I had carried out of that hall like a stone in my shoe, finally turned over and made to bend. He would not bend because he loved me. He would bend because he had no choice. And after everything, that was sweeter than love would have been, because love can be claimed by anyone. Being made to bend against every grain of your pride can only be earned. My brother asked me, carefully, whether I would come home. I thought about it for a moment, honestly, the way you owe an honest question, an honest pause. The man who walked out of that hall would have run the whole way back. He would have crossed the realm on bleeding feet for one word of welcome from that table. But I was not that man anymore. I had a house I grew with my own hands. I had a daughter who called me father, and a woman who stood between my home and the end of the world without being asked, and a giant gentle thing of bark and moss I had raised from a sprout, and a kingdom of people the world threw away the same as it threw me. That was my family. I had not been given it. I had built it out of dirt and stubbornness and the refusal to die quietly, and it was worth more than any name a cold man could restore. So I told my brother the truth. I'll take the name, I said. I built it. It's mine to take back, but I'm not coming home. I looked out over the orchards, the green going on and on, where there had been nothing. This is home. If the family wants me, the family knows the road. He nodded slowly, and I saw that he had expected exactly that, and that some part of him was glad of it. I would be acknowledged. I would not crawl. The house could send for me, write to me, claim me to the realm, but it would do it as men come to a power, not as a master calling back a stray. The two things I had wanted since the first cold morning on this dead land were the same thing, really. To be seen by the ones who refused to see me, and to be seen on my own ground, on my own terms, without ever once bending my own neck to get it. Both of them were mine now. I had not begged for either. I had grown them, like everything else. We came down into the second plaza, and the morning had already turned itself into a party, the way mornings tended to in this village now, with no one's permission and no one's complaint. The mats were laid out under the trees, food going down faster than it could be set out, and in the middle of it all, my family was waiting. Dahlia spotted me first and came barreling across the mats on her little legs, a ball of pale gold down with a voice far too big for her, crowing father and mother in that bright piping lilt as if we had been gone a year and not a night. Behind her, sprawled on a cushion of cotton with the boneless misery of the truly defeated, was Marcus in his small silver shape, groaning that the food had been all you can eat, and a man of his standing could not be expected to refuse such a thing. Wood loomed over him, patting the little silver belly with one enormous wooden hand, gentle as ever, making the cheerful noises he makes. Dahlia scolded the demon for eating an entire ham by himself, which I gathered he had, and then she informed me very seriously that she had waited up, that she had not eaten the good part of the meal because the good part was for when father came home. I knelt down and let her climb up my arm, this small impossible creature who had decided the day she hatched that I was hers, and I felt the last of the rooftop's weight finish leaving me. This was the thing the Great Hall never had, A small voice, glad I had come home. A table where someone saved me the good part. My brother and his knights drifted in behind me, sheepish and enormous. And the moment Dahlia and the other cockatrices noticed them, the whole humbled order forgot every shred of its dignity and went over to sit in the dirt and let the fluffy things climb on them. The slab-faced knight from the rooftop ended up flat on his back, with 3 cockatrices roosting on his breastplate and an expression of helpless wonder on his face. My brother crouched among them with a softness I would not have guessed at a week ago and told me, almost shyly, that his wife and daughter loved these creatures, that he would never be believed at home when he described this place. He went to pet them with his men, and I let him, because a man who has just put down a heavy thing should be allowed to be light for a while. Stella found me at the edge of it, with Dahlia on my shoulder and the noise of my whole strange family at my back. She had carried Dahlia's plate the whole morning, waiting on me the same as the chick had, and she set it down beside me before she spoke. She had seen the roof. Of course she had. There is very little Stella does not see. She asked me, quietly, if I had known, about the sword, about what I could do with it. Did you? I asked her instead. She tilted her head and gave me one of her small, honest answers, the kind she gives when flattery would be beneath the truth. She told me that in the sword, and the sword alone, I was stronger than the founder the Black Dragon Knights still worshipped, stronger than the hero whose defeat their whole order was built around. She said it the way she says everything that matters, plainly, without weight, as if it were simply the shape of the world and she was only describing it. I thought about what that meant. A whole order had ridden across the realm to avenge a man I could have beaten with my offhand. The realm measured worth in magic and called me worthless, and underneath the magic they never looked at, I had quietly become something none of them had a name for. I told her to keep it secret. She blinked at me, and I watched her decide not to argue, which is its own kind of love. I told her I did not want it. Not the title, not the attention, not another order riding across the realm to measure themselves against a thing I never asked to be. I had spent my whole first life being a number on a screen, and my whole second life being a wound in a noble's ledger. I was done being measured. I have a family now, I said. That's enough. It's more than enough. I looked out at all of it. The mats, the lights, the giant of bark, the groaning demon, the brother on his knees in the dirt laughing at a cockatrice, the chick on my shoulder, the elf at my side. Let them keep wondering what I am. I already have everything I went looking for. Stella smiled at that and rested her hand on my arm the way she does, light and certain, and said she understood, that I was the same as her, a legend the world had tried to flatten into a slogan, choosing to be a person instead. 2 of us, hiding our true size on purpose, because the small true thing was worth more than the large famous one. For a moment, the whole world was that plaza, and it was enough, and I let myself believe the story was over. It was not. I should have known better. I felt it before I understood it. A cold that had nothing to do with the autumn air, a wrongness in the bright morning, the smallest tilt in the world. I turned, and it was Marcus. The little silver puppy lay where he had been all morning, belly up on the cotton, eyes half shut from his ridiculous feast. But for one breath, those eyes were not the sleepy ice blue of the harmless thing we had all decided he was. For one breath, they were old. Older than the village, older than the founder Stella felt, older than the family that exiled me and the cold father at the head of its table. Something looked out of my friend the way a deep thing looks up from the bottom of a clear pool. And it was not looking at me. It was looking past me, past the plaza, past the green I had grown, out at a horizon none of the rest of us could see, at something patient and waking, and a very long way off. Then he yawned and complained about the ham again, and was only Marcus. But I had seen it. The home I had built was whole. The wound that drove me for 4 cold years was finally closed. The brother humbled, the father made to bend. My name mine again, and given on my own terms. That war was over, and I had won it. The bigger one had not even started yet. I held my daughter a little tighter, and I looked at the place where the horizon was. And I let the quiet hold for one last morning, because I had a feeling, deep and old and certain, that it was the last quiet morning we were going to get for a long while.